Haggai, a slave in ancient Egypt, carrying massive blocks of stone, pushing them up the soaring pyramids. What would happen if you lived just one day in Egypt under the identity of a slave? So before you get comfortable or take a moment to like the video, subscribe. But only if you truly like what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching the channel from and what time it is. It'll be really interesting to see people joining us from all over the world. Now dim the lights, enjoy the quiet space. Listen to the story along with a little sound of burning wood. Let's step together into tonight's journey. You open your eyes while the sky is still black like diluted ink. A pale grey in the east signalling the new day is about to rise. The low, constant hunger long ago became a foundation in your body. Something like an unending whisper. Eat, work, live. You no longer clearly remember what a day that didn't start like this felt like. The murmurs of the comrades beside you sounds as if even their breaths are stretched, stuck together in the damp space of the woven reed hut. Blend into one another like a piece of music without harmony. So monotonous it settles into your bones. They call where you are a pyramid labour camp. In truth, it is an unceasing cycle of bodies and tools, of pain and silence. You pull yourself out from the old straw blanket, feeling the packed earth floor give slightly under your bare feet. Ground trodden down countless times by exhausted steps. An overseer, scarred and with a gait that comes from being used to seeing blood and muffled cries, walks by. He says nothing, only taps his bamboo staff lightly on the ground. The sharp thock ringing like a reminder. Stand up. You have no right to be lazy. There are things on your body that are no longer new. Calluses on your palms, the faint cracks on your knees from kneeling too long. The worn ropes, leather straps tied to your comrades' wrists to haul them out of excavation pits, have darkened and blistered your skin with every pull. As you step outside, mist still clings to the cold sand. The chill on the plain below the pyramid has never been warmed by the sun. It is light as a warning that you are still alive. But living is not a grace. It is a series of trials. The day begins with inspection. A group of overseers stands in line, their eyes sweeping over the bodies lined up, as if weighing each muscle, each fold of skin. They want to know who still has strength, who is fading. You know that just one sign of weakening, a breath a little longer than usual, a step a bit slower, will get you called out. Out to be counted, out to be compared, out to be recorded in the campmaster's ledger, where names are never spoken aloud, but silently sink into a line of numbers. You are assigned to the stone hauling crew. White limestone blocks from the nearby valley are hewn out, roughly cut, then dragged over wooden ramps and thick ropes to the base of the pyramid that is rising like a vast shadow against the dusk. The work asks for no thought, only your back bent and pull, pull, pull. Sometimes as you drag across the sand, you catch the pyramid's silhouette, reflecting a pale streak of metal, an illusion of completion someone has sketched in your mind. A blurred image that makes your eyes briefly look like they hold hope. But hope is rare. It's buried in the rhythm of counting each pull, each tiny bead of sweat dropping into the sand and soaking in as if it were part of the terrain. The first day you were told about the punishment. If a stone falls, if a rope snaps, if the sound of distraction rings out, the overseer's words falling like rain in even drops, then you will understand. You will be in the box. The box, until then it had been a name barely spoken, but when it touched your skin, it felt colder than any winter. You were taught, it isn't a large, lightless cell. It's a space so small that one must curl up, a cupboard of stone or wood, arranged so that there is almost no room. You heard it recounted by a man who had once been locked inside. He could only feel his heartbeat hour by hour, because the darkness had swallowed everything else. That box made you remember the sensation of being crushed, remember the isolation where even the smallest sound echoed like the howl of the desert. Under the early sun, you begin the work. Rope wrapped around your shoulders, tendons in your arms bulging, your back like a lever, pulling a massive stone to the waiting spot. The others around you whisper, not because they know anything special to say, but because whispering is the only thing left when you cannot shout. Disease spreads like sand seeping into the seams of your sandals. Stone dust, dirty water, meagre meals. Each day you drink murky water, sometimes mixed with sediment, so your throat slowly learns to swallow without protest. Food, a bowl of thin wheat porridge, sometimes with a few dried onion slices or some stewed beans, sometimes just weak broth made from bones that have been stripped of all nourishment. Whatever remains is divided among those still standing. You begin to utter silent thanks with every spoonful of gruel, not because it's tasty, but because it's what keeps you from collapsing in the desert. In the first days, you still have strength. The body responds. Pain, but still moving, still pulling. Then one day a stone falls. Not because you were careless, but because the rope was frayed. It had been used for months, the fibres worn and tattered, yet the overseer never replaced it immediately. The stone drops. Its heavy impact on the ground rings out like a death knell. The overseer rushes over, his face flushed with anger tempered under the sun. He doesn't need to say anything. He just nods to another. You are called out. They lead you to the cramped area behind the fence. The heavy wooden door creaks open. You are pushed inside. The air in there is stifling, the smell of mildew and old sweat clinging to the walls. You try to keep your balance, but the box, really more like a small vault than anything else, makes you curl in. Shoulders hunch. You hear your heart beating. The steady rhythm that once meant safety, now a drive. Survive. The door closes. A guard stands outside like a silent wall. You lie down. Those before you have told stories of counting 72 hours in there. Time is no longer divided by hours. Each hour is a breath. Each breath is a sharp moment. You cannot turn your head, cannot stretch. The first sensation is cold, seeping into every hollow. Then gradually the heat of your own body building up, as if you are struggling between two worlds. On one side, the distant light outside. On the other, the tight darkness slowly swallowing the memory of everything else. You remember the first feeling when you were put in there, not because of a major crime, only because of a small mishap caused by old tools, because the rope wasn't strong. Breaths from outside filter in, like echoes from another world. You listen. The wind outside the camp, someone coughing softly, footsteps passing by. They become landmarks on a fading, erased map. When they open the door, for a moment you forget you're still alive. Your eyes slowly adjust. The light cuts in like something strange, too bright, too strong. They drag you out as if pulling a wet cloth. You are brought back into the line. They look at you, not with pity, just with a measuring gaze. Your body trembles, not from fear anymore, but because you've grown used to the urgency of living in tight space. The overseer reaches out, taps your shoulder lightly with his staff. Not a strike meant to kill, but one to remind. Don't let that happen again. His eyes don't need to say more. You understand. Next time it won't be another box, but something else. Sometimes a whole week without being allowed down to eat on time. Sometimes the lash. You return to the work. Your body at this point is no longer entirely yours. It is a collection of reflexes. As the sun rises high, you feel your skin burning, each drop of sweat falling into the sand, dissolving into tiny rings. An older man who has lived longer than you thought whispers, "It is the box that teaches people how to keep silent. When the box has swallowed memory, people begin to no longer feel pain, only emptiness." You hear it without reacting. That sentence slides under your skin like an affirmation. You are gradually becoming something even more pliable, body working, mind silent. Midday is a brief silence. They give you another bowl of gruel, chewing slowly, with a focus almost sacred. The gruel has no taste, but when you swallow it, it fills a void inside you, a void you used to call weakness. You sit beneath a makeshift cloth shade, bowl in hand, watching them mark each stone that's been hauled up. A newly arrived boy, eyes wide, looks around as if trying to lock in the image of another world. You remember being like that too. The look contains a flicker of hope. Then that hope dissolves with each bead of sweat. You say nothing to him. There are no comforting words appropriate for someone who has just been taught that every word is a source of energy that can be drained. The afternoon stretches on, and with it come new cuts. Sometimes when you bend and pull the rope, your skin slides against it, stinging, the sound soft like folded paper being torn. You know there will be new scars. Night does not bring release. Breaths blend together like a cloth laid over your face. You don't sleep deeply. Your body only dozes, keeping part of itself alert so you won't be dragged out. You wish you could forget. You wish you could draw a line between today and yesterday. But everything sticks together like wet sand, indistinct. And then a small plague began to spread through the camp, dry coughing that wouldn't end. They called it the dust of the pyramid, because it came from breathing in the fine particles of stone as it was ground. You watch the man beside you suddenly no longer have the strength to pull. His eyes are swollen, his skin pale, each coughing fit tearing at his throat, as if something is trying to drag his entrails out of his chest. The overseer doesn't bother to understand. He's pulled aside. Someone from the medical group, those assigned to assess, looks at him, then shakes their head. A damp cloth is placed over his face, and he's taken away, not out of the camp, but to another area where few pass. Many days later, you hear that he is gone. It was a death without cries, without ritual, just silence. And then they clear his place, bring someone else, and the work continues. You begin to learn that not everyone lives long enough to see the pyramid rise a few more tiers. Death doesn't arrive as a sudden, bright strike, but as a wearing away. A breath that dwindles, a step that slows, a slight nod of the head while standing in line, until the person can no longer stand. Death is bare, without glory, without chance. Just a hollowness draped over by the bowed heads of the others. He's gone. And you, do you know his name? You're no longer sure. Each person becomes a mark, a space connecting the one before and after, so that each name slips from memory like fine sand sliding through wet fingers. On the 7th night after you arrived at the camp, you lie on the thin straw mat, eyes staring up at the sky. The stars far away, tiny as pinpricks glittering, but you no longer feel much. You think about the day you left, the day when you could still believe there was a future beyond the stones, beyond the box. That thought now feels like a dim dream you don't dare pull back, afraid that if you close your eyes and call it, the light of those old days will flare up and then dissolve, leaving a larger emptiness. You begin telling yourself stories, a habit to keep your mind from unravelling. You speak of how you first lifted a stone, of the laughter of someone already dead, of the smell of the midday bowl of gruel. The story is simple, without an ending. It is like a thin thread holding you from falling completely into the shapeless silence. The tale moves slowly, like syrup pouring, each word dropping, and you feel the weariness in your own tone. Somewhere in the camp, a small drum beats, announcing that tomorrow morning will bring another inspection. You listen, then close your eyes. You know that tomorrow will begin again. You know that what you are going through is not temporary. It is a chain. And even when you are so tired you can't think of anything else, you still know. You are alive, in a rough, slow, struggling way. That is your existence today, and you will keep pulling. You close your eyes, and in the half-dream darkness you hear the silent waves of sand outside the camp like a motionless ocean. From deep within, you feel something like a faint promise. Today has passed. Tomorrow will come again. Keep the breath. Keep the body. Keep telling the story. And you fall asleep, not exactly resting, but in a state between the two, between endurance and escape. Waking up in the morning is no longer the jolt of panic. Now you know how to listen to your body before it breaks. You no longer look at the pyramid as a cold, inanimate block of stone. It is a presence always hovering behind every thought, a kind of fate you cannot avoid, but can learn to walk beside with as little scraping as possible. Today is the 10th day since you arrived at the camp. The box has become a blurred memory, but its imprint still lies somewhere under your skin. When you bend down to pull the rope, Your shoulders still throb like a reminder that they were once pressed tight. You begin learning how to avoid being called out. Not by becoming lazy, but by analysing every motion, every glance. An older man in the group, whom everyone calls the Old Master, even though no one remembers his real name, has taken notice of you. He watches you pull stone. And one evening when the sun, red like a sphere, was fading in the distance, he pulls you aside into a small corner behind the water well. It's not just about pulling hard, he says, his voice hoarse, but carrying wisdom tempered by decades of pain. You have to know how to use weight. Use your hips. Don't let your body strain. When you strain, you show. When you show, they see, they measure, they record, they punish. You listen. He shows you how to set your feet, how to lean so the strap doesn't dig into raw skin, but disperses into your hip bones. How to ease the pull a bit when you feel fatigue so your breathing doesn't become irregular by the overseer's standard. A few days later, you find yourself called out fewer times. Not because you work less, but because you've learnt to hide exhaustion like an artist hides scars. At the same time, you begin to recognise other faces, not just shadows passing by. There's a young boy newly arrived, whose eyes you remember clearly. They're like your own on the first day, full of hope and unaware of how his life will be bent. There's a middle-aged woman who used to keep the rhythm for the crew next to yours. Her sighs sound like an old song. And there's a boy who seems barely into his teens, a strip of cloth still wrapped around an old wound on his wrist. But his eyes are deep, no longer stirred by what's newly happening. One afternoon, that boy collapsed while pulling a stone. You saw the difference. He didn't slump down slowly, but as if something pulled him backward. His eyes opened wide and then closed. Those around stammered, afraid, not knowing whether a new sickness was coming back. You ran over, using the little strength you had left to help him sit. The old master stood nearby, silent. A few overseers passed and you held your breath. He wasn't allowed to weaken in front of them. They looked, then moved on because he was still standing. A small motion, a pretense enough to keep him from being called out. "Push water in," the old master whispered. "Gently. Don't let them see anything obvious. We keep each other that way." You took the murky water skin, touched his lips lightly, letting him drink little by little. The boy slowly opened his eyes. You felt his breath even out. You placed your hand on his shoulder. A small touch. No one said anything. No one acknowledged it. It was a temporary survival. When he was able to stand, his eyes were still hazy, but there was a silent thank you sent toward you. A few days later, he no longer collapsed, but he coughed up sounds that made your skin chill. You realise that fragile bond is another thing keeping you from falling apart. Every time you give someone half of your dry bread, every time you quietly stand before a newcomer and give them a look, those are signals of, we remain. They can't speak, words can be heard, recorded, but a glance, a nod, a secretly passed warm sip, that's not something easily cut off completely. Occasionally, when no one is watching, you and the old master draw small marks on the ground, dots, curved lines to mark, this day has passed, still alive. It isn't writing, you don't remember the old letters anymore, but it's a mental map, an affirmation that we still exist. About a week later, a rumour spreads through the camp. A new overseer from the city has arrived, and he brings something to teach the lazy ones. Teach, in their language, means ramp up inspections, hand out public punishments, and make everyone cringe before what they call transparency. You hear the news from a water carrier, who looks at you and whispers cautiously, he sees more. He remembers. He likes to let others see the pain he can cause. Fear is no longer something random. It has become a thin cut under the skin. Someone can be pulled out halfway for a small mistake, and that mistake is suddenly magnified. In recent days, you've noticed a pulley at the hauling station. The main rope doesn't look right, but if it's replaced immediately, it will be noticed and will be written onto the slow-down list. You know the system. The new overseer's gaze is on every movement, every lag, and you also know who fixes it. Some more skilled workers, but they're held in another group, not allowed access to that rope. The pulley you see, if you slow it down a little when a crowd is pulling, progress will be delayed, and that overseer will turn his eyes somewhere else, distracted for a few minutes. It's a small vice, but it creates space, and space sometimes is the difference between being called out or not. You don't do anything overt. You pull the rope, but place a small pebble under the wheel so it catches slightly every few turns. Not enough to make the stone fall, but enough to stretch the moment. To make the new overseer stop, look closely, then nod as if he's found the fault, then let it go. In a corner, the boy who just recovered watches you, his eyes saying something. He doesn't speak, but you know he understands. This is not a great act of rebellion. It is a small alley you leave for yourself, a bit of control amid the loss of control. The nights after begin with whispers about how to keep something inside whole. The old master tells that when he was young, he once saw another man, a worker, who had laboured on some ancient project, who kept a small stone under his pillow, rubbing it against his skin every night, as if to remember the feeling of touching something that was not just a tool. That stone, according to the story, was the only thing that person carried with him when he was moved. It was the only memory that didn't fade into the blur. You hear it and feel gratitude. A small object can hold your self-awareness in place. One night when the pale moon draped over the camp, you find a small shard of stone among the rubble, in a corner of the site. You clean it with a torn cloth, then tuck it under your shirt, pressing it lightly to your chest whenever you feel yourself nearly unravelling. It is not a promise about the future. It is an anchor, a whisper. I am still me. I once was me. I have not been fully crushed. Then sickness continues to stalk. The wind carrying fine sand slips again into someone else's lungs. Dry coughing, fever, rapid wasting. You begin to understand more clearly the secret to surviving. Keeping the sick warm with a thin scrap of cloth stealthily taken from the shoe repair area. Shading them with a small shadow when overseers pass. Hiding your extra food to give them spoonfuls. That aid is not a generous offering. It is an unspoken cooperation. Those who survive are those who know how to keep each other. Yet at the same time, if you're found organising too much, you'll be seen as a leader, and leaders are held tighter. One night the new boy, who had recovered somewhat, was called out in the middle of dinner. A hard tap of the staff on the ground signalled, "Out there." He went, not resisting. They led him to another area, not the box, but a long table and a flat lash. A new overseer, with eyes sharp as knives, began asking about who had helped you by lightly whipping his hand. You couldn't hear his words, only the soft crack of skin, then saw him brace himself, not cry. When he came back, his steps were slower. His eyes stared into the distance, as if part of him had been cleaved off. He didn't speak to you, but you saw his hand still trembling. The old master bowed his head. A shared silence among those who had been taught, again. The price of keeping each other was a fragment broken, not entirely shattered, but cracked. You wonder, where is the boundary between holding on to humanity and becoming something worn down? When you help others, you put them in danger. When you live only for yourself, you become hollow. There is no clear answer. The answer lives in the quiet sighs, in the small nods, in the moments you squeeze the boy's hand when he thinks he's about to collapse again. One another evening, you dream of the city, a place you've heard about. Red-tiled roofs, crowded markets, people shouting as they haggle, the smell of spices in the air. In the dream you carry a basket, move through the crowd, meet a woman selling bread. She smiles and hands you a warm loaf. When you wake, you lie there for a long time, your hand still clutching the small stone beneath your shirt. And you tell yourself, this is not forgetting. It's a piece of something out there. It still exists. You try to hold on to those dreams like holding on to breath, drafting them in your mind, retelling them to yourself each night in simple words. The city smells, warm bread, people smile. You begin to see the difference between just surviving and starting to tell again. When you work in silence, you are a machine. When you tell, even if only to yourself, you are a person trying to remember who you are. And in the brief moments between hauling stone and eating a bowl of gruel, small stories are added. The story of the day you learned how to pull without being exposed. The story of the first time you gave water to someone about to collapse. The story of one night you hid a scrap of cloth under the mattress for the boy who was called out. It is a web of small things, grains of sand stuck together into a larger patch. I have not been entirely swallowed. As you enter the 15th day, a new inspection comes. The new overseer walks past each person, his gaze like a weighing scale. He touches their shoulders, taps their knees lightly to see the reaction. You feel it in every small movement. Your neck tilts slightly. Your pulling rhythm shifts. You see him stop beside the boy, his eyes sharper than before. The boy steps back a little, but doesn't burst into tears. He turns to you. You hold your gaze steady, not too long, not too short. He nods and moves on. You feel your body exhale. The old master lightly touches your shoulder, as if to say, he's watching. He doesn't forget, but we still find space. The rest of the afternoon passes in a soft vigilance. Everyone works, but there is something like a thinner thread pulling them together, understanding that eyes are attentive, and sometimes those half-dormant looks can take away control. You go back to the sleeping area, sit beside the boy. He's holding the small stone you gave him earlier, pressing it into his palm as if to confirm it's still his. He says nothing, but you see him raise his hand, lightly touch your shoulder. A short touch, enough to convey, "Thank you, I'm still here." You close your eyes and once again hear the old whisper inside yourself. Tomorrow continues. Keep the breath, keep the story, keep each other. There is a quiet moment before the choice is placed on the table. It doesn't come like a loud proclamation. It comes like the flicker of a small flame stirred by wind, when you realise you can hold on to something more than just getting through the day, and at the same time know clearly that holding on to that can also hurt others. The day begins with the report drum. The new overseer has not taken his eyes off the camp. He moves through each sector, his gaze like two blades, cutting through the silence hardened like dry earth. There is something in the way he observes, not just watching the work, but watching how people watch each other. The light touches, the furtive exchanged looks, the way a bit of gruel is slipped into someone's hand behind their back, all start to appear systematic to the sharp eye. Rumour spreads quickly. They are searching for something hidden beneath the surface. The network that you and those closest to you built with silent oaths is no longer only internal survival. It is being labelled in their minds as a shoot that can be pruned. You find yourself caught between two pulls. On one side is the relative safety of continuing to live by what you've learnt. Make no noise. Don't show. Keep what you share small. Cling to the little stone under your shirt, like a marker of yourself. On the other is something softer, a smouldering thing under the skin. If there's a small way to pull the rope, to open a gap someday, should I try? That small way isn't a grand escape. It's a gentle leaning, finding a route through the stone chute without being seen, to listen for other sounds beyond, to understand if anything outside is shifted, to carve out a bit of private space in your mind. It's a sliver of freedom, as small as a grain of sand, but it could become the foundation for something larger, if you don't let it break. 2 days ago, while fixing a pulley set too tight, you happen to notice a tiny hole beneath the rough wooden floor, where the younger haulers strain and never look. Beneath it is a narrow cavity leading into an old water conduit, sealed with dry mortar. People use it partly to stash broken tools, and partly as a temporary slide for small stones. The old master once said, "Every place has an empty spot. The hard part is keeping their eyes from looking over your shoulder." You begin to notice that whenever the new overseer walks by, he moves in a particular way. He doesn't focus on the whispers themselves, but on where whispers might begin. That cavity, if exploited just enough, could be a means of listening. catching sounds from outside the camp at night, knowing who goes out, who comes back, whether a large shift in stone movement is coming. A part of you whispers, if I knew exactly when a big transport was happening, I could slow it a little to stretch time for the sick, or give newcomers a few extra minutes of rest. That's helping without being too conspicuous. But the other part warns, anyone who does that and gets caught will not only be beaten, they will interrogate those who saw, they will smash the network, they will take away whatever remains. The cost of trying to hold a little private space could be seeing the old master dragged out in the middle of the night for teaching others, or the boy being called out and then used to break whatever's left in him. You try to keep that thought to yourself. You tell no one. You don't write it down. You touch the small stone beneath your shirt and listen to your breath. The choice is appearing like a thin fork, not a full departure from the path, but a small branch that can lead you to better understanding. What others are thinking, what the overseer will do next, whether the boy has enough strength to pull, how much space the old master needs to avoid being detected as someone who's helping. And you begin to use that cavity. At night, after everyone has fallen into exhausted sleep and the drum has gone quiet, you slip out, squat beside the old pulley, take a small wooden stick and tap lightly on the mortar. The sound rings back, the echo from the shaft. You press your ear to it, hearing footsteps, wind whistling through the rock face, the bray of a distant donkey. Ordinary sounds, but with the understanding that they are part of a larger picture. You commit them to memory. You begin to piece the fragments together. In the early hours of Monday, there is usually a large transport convoy. Once you know that, you can use it, not to flee, but to stretch time a little for the sick who are about to collapse. Then everything changes abruptly. One afternoon, when the sun touched the golden threshold, the way of hauling stone had become so familiar that you almost didn't have to think anymore. A dry groan from behind echoed. The boy, whom you had placed your trust in, who kept the small stone under his pillow like a leaf holding warmth, collapsed. This time was not like before. His hand gripped the rope tight, his face ashen, but his eyes flickered something different. Not fear, but a call. "Support me," he whispered, his voice completely strained. "I can't pull anymore." You throw everything you have into it, coordinating with the old master, pulling carefully, making sure the block doesn't fall, while not disturbing anything enough to make the overseer stop. Your shoulders nearly break from the effort. When the stone reaches a safe spot, the boy collapses, unable to stand. The old master drags him into a temporary shadow, a place the old ones can hide with a little sound and a few ragged cloths, then looks at you. "You have to go get water," he says. "Quick, but don't let anyone see you lurking. If they notice something is happening, they won't just ask the boy, they'll ask who helped." You run. On the way, you try to control your breathing, because a heavy breath could make the patrol stop. You grab the water skin, fill it until it's nearly overflowing. When you return, the boy is lying there, deep hollows under his eyes, breathing shallowly. You put water into his mouth bit by bit, pouring it like pouring life. The old master touches his forehead, then nods. "High fever. Need to fill him." Meanwhile, you look around, out of the corner of your eye. A new overseer is standing nearby, but does not stop. Something like a cold premonition runs through your bones. They are watching. It feels like a blade sliding across thin skin. The boy rouses a little, his lips trembling. He looks at you, doesn't speak, but his eyes open wide, and in them something lingers. "Thank you." Then a shout rings out from afar. "Someone is holding back!" The large overseer rushes over. The small hole in the system, a discrepancy that they've noticed, an extra water skin, a damp stain where it shouldn't be, makes them suspicious. The old master shoves you aside, shielding with his body like blocking rain. The overseer comes close to the boy, raises his hand, flicks lightly on his forehead to check if anything is being hidden. "Who gave you water?" they ask, their voice sharp. The boy looks at you, a moment as long as a lifetime. He doesn't speak, he just shakes his head as if to say, "I don't remember, I don't know." The overseer turns to you, You feel the look like needle pricks. Everything could end here if you don't control it. You stay silent. His eyes probe, something like an unspoken weighing. He looks at the old master. He looks at the boy. Then he shakes his head and walks away. After that come several days of tension, almost icy. The new overseer increases the inspections. Every look now carries weight. Accidental touches are now interpreted as signs of the network. The boy does not recover quickly. Every time he collapses, there is a small crisis. Sometimes you see the overseer standing behind, hands clenched, eyes like they're searching for another sprout. You know that something has been revealed. Not clear evidence, but a sense in the space. Someone saw the boy being helped, and that person told someone. Or someone's gaze passed something along to another. The old master only looks at you once with something mixed between complicity, gratitude, and fear. We are playing with fire, but if we abandon the boy, it will be total failure. You choose. You look down at the small stone beneath your shirt. It heats up as if mirroring your heartbeat. I can't abandon him, you whisper. But if they increase the level of breaking, then the network will blow up. The old master nods. That night, when everyone is asleep, you know the new overseer has cut back who can move freely. You go to the boy, place your hand lightly on his forehead. I'll cover, you say. Others will think it's illness. We slow it. We keep him alive. He doesn't speak, just closes his eyes. The next morning, another shout rings out. A stone hauler is badly hurt when a temporary support beneath a large block collapses. Chaos erupts. Stones fall, voices shout, and the overseer rushes over, not out of mercy, but because the shock that progress might be interrupted. A large momentum drops, dragging many into it. For a few seconds, you see the boy, though not fully recovered, trying to get up to pull the rope, as if he can't let anyone else collapse. The old master yells, Don't, let someone else pull. But the boy defies it, trying to help, and you spring forward, grab his hand, pull him back. Another block almost falls. If it lands, it would crush a group. You throw everything you have into it, shove someone else aside, redirect the force. A pull not in the plan to keep things temporarily stable. The overseer turns back, his gaze simultaneously fixed on you and the boy. In that moment, you stand between something like life and the edge. If the large stone doesn't hold, there will be screaming, and they will tell who helped whom during interrogations, and the network will be peeled apart piece by piece. The stone holds. A short silence. The overseer walks by, then stops, then turns away. Once again, a feeling not proof. The boy collapses, unable to breathe. You place your hand on his chest to feel the pulse. It's weak. The old master is beside him, his face full of fatigue and a faint, skeptical relief. Something happened without being broken completely. The overseer says nothing. But there is a look, not of suspicion, but of someone taking note. They survived just enough, and are wary. After that chaos, the distance between you and the boy shrinks deep. There is no more quiet hesitation. The boy takes the small stone you once gave him. He hands you a piece of dry bread, less than half as an answer. He speaks very softly, hoarse. If I didn't help you, they would have pulled you out. If you didn't help me, I wouldn't know how to keep my balance. That simple sentence is like an unwritten pact. You nod. You know that the bond now is not just helping each other live. It is trust tested under pressure. You chose to protect him when being watched. He chose to stand up despite weakness, so the network wouldn't be broken. Something like a silent thank you spreads. From the hand touches, from the way he looks at you, without overt expression, to you hiding a small scrap of cloth under his blanket to keep him warm. That moment, when both of you are just two tired bodies in a camp full of sighs, becomes a landmark. That afternoon, the old master pulls you into a corner. They're starting to see the blurred things, he whispers. What you're doing with that cavity, you have to be more careful. But also, they need a reason to think everything is just everyday life. You and the boy, your movements now have to look like a sequence of ordinary actions. What we've done to help each other, has to blend into the background as something that's been there for a long time. You agree, but in your mind that fork is still there. The cavity, the eavesdropping, the knowledge of the upcoming shift. It doesn't leave. That small piece of freedom you've been tending has become part of why you keep pulling. Because it gives you the feeling that there is something I still control. That feeling could save lives, or tear everything apart. That night, while the boy sleeps, you sit alone, the small stone in your hand. You whisper into your own small space. We've kept it, but soon the time will come to choose. Should I push a little more, to open the listening path wider, to be able to save more when the larger crisis comes? Or stay as is, stay quiet, so the attention doesn't spread, so what's left isn't cut off? The question has no easy answer. You turn the stone in your hand, feeling the rough edge. Just a little more, you tell yourself, just a bit more understanding. Then I'll know whether to go deeper or pull back. The silence now is no longer emptiness. It has weight. Every passing glance is measured. Every small movement carries a kind of echo that you learn to analyse like a craftsman studying a tiny crack in stone, knowing where it will break, where it can hold. The new overseer doesn't just walk by anymore. He doesn't take his eyes off. He begins to notice the places that are not obvious faults that he might have let pass before. The way two people exchange a small nod. The way a bit of water is secretly passed from one hand to another. The way someone stands a second longer than normal when a comrade is weak. He begins to pose questions without words, but the air around you fills with them. A feeling like an invisible cord pulled taut. And when it's stretched enough, it will snap back. The situation erupts suddenly one morning before the sun is high. A woman in the group responsible for distributing meals, one whose eyes you've seen heavy with sadness like an old song, is caught with a bit of flour hidden in her sleeve. Not much, just enough for the sick to get a few extra spoonfuls. The overseers catch her. They pull her out into the yard. The whole group stands still like stone. You know that first look, if it were just hiding flour, could be handled with a public lesson, but this time they don't stop there. They begin to interrogate. Who gave it to you? Who did you give it to? You didn't do this alone. Their words aren't loud, but they open a door through which cold wind blows. The door from which the network starts to be examined link by link. She looks toward you, then at the old master, then at the boy, glances like threads connecting. And you feel something in the silence. She doesn't want to confess, but her face is warped by exhaustion. The overseer gives her a choice. Name the source in exchange for keeping her body intact, or stay silent and accept consequences unknown. She chooses silence. The punishment isn't the old repeated box. They make it public. She's dragged into the centre of the yard, her hands bound and beaten with a flat lash. Not to kill, but to make everyone remember. The sound of skin hitting the lash is like the knock of stones striking in a mine. But something quieter cuts through. A warning, an unspoken command. With each lash she stands upright, eyes fixed straight ahead at the line of people. When it's over, she's pulled away but not given back the remainder of the meal. The terrifying thing isn't the pain, it's her expression. No anger, no pleading, just a worn-down resolve. I will not break the network, I keep it intact. The whispers spread after. They're searching. They're tightening. Everything will get more tense. That is the moment you understand clearly. The listening cavity you once kept entirely to yourself is no longer something you can hold in silence alone. When the network is under scrutiny, any vague support can be pulled apart and analysed. The overseers begin to adjust their habits. They don't ask directly. They create a new normal to observe. Now everyone is required to perform invisible checks on each other, like a small ritual. Someone sets a bowl down, someone else picks it up, watching for reactions. They expand their scrutiny meticulously. How many people stand nearby when a bit of water is passed? The the spacing of footsteps when someone is weak, and which looks last longer than usual, you face a new choice. The cavity had helped you learn the timing of an upcoming large stone transport. That is an opportunity. If you use it to alert the group, you can slow that pull at a critical point, so a weak person isn't crushed by the weight, maybe save a life, reduce the disruption that could draw the overseer's attention. But if they discover that someone new ahead, they will be merciless. They will dig deep to find the source and unravel every connection. And this time it won't be just lashes. They might break the group apart, transfer people, or, more terrifying, take something from your mind like they did to the one previously called the Broken One. The Broken One appeared a few days earlier. A middle-aged man, gaunt, skin darkened to the point his age is hard to tell, marked by public torture. They brought him to camp with torn clothes, trembling hands, moving slowly, and no one really knew what he had done to be taught. People whispered about him. He once tried to protect someone. He once refused to confess. They broke him, then forced him to work, and now he's only a fragment. You see him sitting in a corner, his eyes looking through space like he just stepped out of a thick fog. The old master looks at him with a cautious mix of empathy and wariness. One night when the sky is dark and the camp is steeped in heavy snores, the Broken One calls you over. He doesn't speak loudly. He gives you a small piece of dry bread, his hand shaking, but the action sure. "I heard you have that cavity," he whispers. "I used to know it too, before they took..." He pauses, as if sizing you up. "If you give me a bit, trust, I can help you hide it. I know how to blur traces, how to make people think it's just wind. But one thing in return, I need to know you'll use it to save those who are about to fall, not just to slow things for your own safety. The network exists if there's something worth keeping. I was broken from the inside. I held on to a small piece of myself because someone once trusted me, and I want to give back." You sit there, your hand still resting on the small stone under your shirt, listening to every word. He doesn't ask for a name. He doesn't demand outright. He lays out a condition. "If you use it, I'll help you make it blur. But I also want to know if everything is exposed, I'm the one who goes first because I already have the mark. You have to decide who is worth covering." The "in return" in his words carries a heavy flavour, not because of threat, but because he's offering you a choice with consequences. Someone who has been broken understands the price of sheltering others, and he's giving you the filter to choose. When you go back to the sleeping area, the boy looks at you. "Who is he?" he asks softly, his voice weak. You don't say much, just place a hand on his shoulder, then touch the stone under your shirt lightly. "Someone who knows what you and I are holding. He can help, but if used wrongly, it will take more." He falls silent, then nods. You feel the tension in his eyes, not sure whether it's fear or a new awareness of risk. The bond between you two is now deeper, but also more fragile because you're not just holding help anymore, you're balancing the new secret. The next day, the oversight in the eyes of the overseers sharpens. They intensify inspection of small dark corners where exchanges might happen. They begin to require each group to report who touched whom. The private space is pushed gradually toward the edge. And some news, a small voice from afar reaches you. The woman who was beaten has been moved elsewhere. Not to die, to serve as a long-term example. She's displayed as a warning about keeping silent, then not spoken of again. Like a shadow moving between quarters. Everyone knows she's alive, but no one knows where she is. That disappearance makes people quieter. Sound pulled inward. You know that using the cavity to save the boy recently has made something in the space more sensitive. You also know that if you don't act when the large stone transport comes, a few will collapse because they have no preparation. The Broken One said, "If you save them, you'll have allies. If you let them fall, you'll have to live with that." The choice becomes clear. Not between safety and risk, but between fighting the system by keeping people alive and abandoning them to indulge a false peace. The night before the large stone transport, you meet secretly with the Broken One and the Old Master. The boy sits still, his eyes glinting with a small determination. The Broken One draws in the dirt with the tip of his stick, the method. When the pull comes, there is a moment where the force peaks, and if it's pushed further, a weak person won't bear it. With information from the cavity, you know exactly when that time is approaching. Somewhere near mid-morning, when the heat begins to rise, and the overseer usually briefly averts his gaze to check another area. The plan? Slow that pull just enough so the compressed time diffuses, giving the weak person a moment to breathe, and use the blur created by the Broken One to mask that slow point as a natural variation in the rhythm of the hall. You are tense. The boy looks at you, no words needed, just lightly touches the small agreed upon sign of consent, a nod that says, "I trust." You feel the small stone under your shirt warm, as if echoing your heartbeat. "If we're found out," you whisper, "I'll be the one to go first. You'll cover others after, that's the deal." The Broken One nods, then looks to the Old Master. He whispers, "We weave this piece carefully. They will sense. But if they can't break it, other eyes will begin to believe there is something bigger. A network not only of fear, but of saving." The next morning's light cuts like a knife, and the large stone transport begins. You stand in place, silent, feeling every pulse. The overseer passes by, his gaze sweeping over you, pausing on a few others, but not digging too deep. As the moment approaches, you gently ease the pull by sliding the agreed-upon pebble into place. Not enough to let the stone roll, but enough to stretch an instant. The boy behind senses it, adjusts his position, grabs the rope, and at the peak of the weight, he takes a long breath, not expending energy, just receiving time. The weak person is moved into a small safe zone, and what could have broken does not. The Broken One, off to the side, makes a small motion like covering sound, a movement you can't describe, only know that it causes the overseer's eye to glide past without stopping. That slow point drifts like wind over the desert. Others sense it, but cannot affirm it, and the hall continues unbroken. When it's all over, there are no shouts, no transparency, just a quiet relief spreading through bodies at work. The boy looks at you, a tired half-smile flickering in his eyes. The Broken One quietly approaches, places a hand on your shoulder. Not a full embrace, just a touch enough to convey, "It's okay." The Old Master stands behind, eyes half closed, as if exhaling a long breath. But you know something was sensed. The overseer doesn't come immediately. He doesn't need to. He looks around, scans the new normal, storing everything that looks similar, but isn't. And the most dangerous thing is, he says nothing. That is the mark of someone keeping a list in his head. You return to the sleeping area at night. The boy lies beside you, and you whisper, "We saved him, but now we have to ask, where do we go from here?" He answers simply, "Keep each other. Don't let them see too much. If they ask, I'll say nothing unusual. I'll bear the pain." You know the price the boy might pay, and you know the price you're carrying. The cavity, that small piece of freedom, is no longer just a tool. It is a fragile tether between life and collapse, between trust and suspicion. The sensing didn't erupt into immediate questioning, but it was like a thin fog settling on lenses. You couldn't see clearly, but you knew it was there. The overseers didn't act like before. They didn't shout, didn't drag anyone into the yard, but began to deploy small systematic steps. Inspections suddenly slowed, stretched longer. They started requiring one person to stand behind another during shift changes, as if outwardly it was a technical check, but in essence watching chains of interaction. Who touched whom? Who held a gaze longer? Who passed water to whom while others' eyes were elsewhere? Ordinary gestures became arithmetic with pluses and minuses. The network, you and those closest maintaining it through silence and tiny things, was now being tested thread by thread. And then the newcomer arrived. He was brought into the camp like a representative, sent from above. A tall, healthy young man with sun-darkened skin, an unremarkable gaze. Nothing stand out, except one thing. He was assigned to informally participate, under the pretense of being someone experienced from elsewhere, someone others were told to trust, who had survived harsher inspections before, and could help maintain order. Everyone looked at him with a mix of caution and expectation. He wasn't someone broken by torture. He was intact. And that itself was strange. In a group of worn-down bodies, a body without deep scars like marks of resistance made people both believe and doubt. The old master was the first to pull you aside when he saw that newcomer standing near you and the boy. "Not everyone is here to help," he whispered. His habitual silence softened. They brought him down to look. He lingers where scars don't touch. His eyes don't glance. They watch. Be careful. You followed his gaze. The newcomer smiled gently, placed his hand on a nearby stone as if feeling its rhythm, then turned away. The boy sitting beside you had uncertainty in his eyes. You said nothing. The cavity in your head, the alert echoes you'd used to hear the stone hall, now had a new sound, something like analysis. The broken one came after quietly. He stood at the edge, watching the newcomer with a light attitude. "They placed him here to create resonance," he said one evening, his voice low like a slowly rolling stone. "Not to expose obvious resistance. He's something set between those who live together, a test of how far the line can stretch before snapping. If he comes too close and we're not careful, we'll leave traces. If he avoids too much, it means we're being watched to see the reaction." You felt the fatigue in his words. Someone broken sees the trap before it's even built. Then one morning that test moved closer. The boy, still weak, was called out to do a small task, move a small stone from here to there, a seemingly simple job, but a pretext. The newcomer followed him, and the overseer's gaze swept like an arrow seeking a point to anchor. You felt the cage of pressure tighten. If he was questioned, even if he stayed silent, what happened would be examined through connection, because the newcomer had been near, a casual touch, a look, something becoming a piece. The boy returned. His eyes flickered, not with fear, but with something you recognized. "He's testing." He bent close to you and whispered, "He asked me about the cavity. He asked if anyone else is helping." I said no, but he looked at the small stone under my shirt. You didn't react overtly. You listened. The cavity in your mind was trying to distinguish, is the newcomer merely observing or probing? Is the overseer using him as a screen to provoke a response? The boy stayed quiet, gave you a tentative thing, a nod. "I'll keep silent if you cover." You nodded back. That night the three of you met. Not openly. The broken one offered a sharp proposal. He's not just a test. If he goes deeper, there will come a time when he must act, and that action will make noise. We can't stay as we are. We have to give him something to expend. A diversion. The old master looked at you, then at the boy. What holds him? A small bait. A piece of false help. Let him believe he's being given something without exposing it. But be careful. If he is a mirror, what he reflects can snap back into our faces. You understood. The diversion was, let the newcomer believe he has a connection. Show him a small sign that you're aligned. But in reality, it wasn't so. You gave him a small piece of dry bread, just enough for him to believe you were opening. When he turned away, you used that intention to watch his reaction through the cavity, to see if he used that information to piece further. The broken one helped create a blur layer over the action. A shadow from behind, an empty movement as he passed, making something in the air feel like the support he assumed he saw. You gave him a fake signal. The next day, the newcomer approached while you were hauling stone. He placed a hand lightly on your shoulder, an exploratory touch, and asked in a tone scented with advice. "I've heard you have ways to keep the weak from collapsing. Can you show me? I want to help maintain progress." The voice was casual, like tool exchange. You responded with a small smile. Few words. "There are tricks, but that's to keep people. Not everyone understands." He studied you for a moment, then withdrew. You didn't know if he believed or doubted. Notably, the next day he lingered near the boy again, but didn't ask. The boy kept silent, eyes slightly widened. The test stretched over days. The overseer slowly watched the interactions between you, the boy, the broken one, and the newcomer. Everything became loose. The small adhesive actions from before were now cloaked in new wariness. The network was operating, not through big moves, but through small things. A bowl of water placed not too conspicuously, a look held a moment longer, a small stone repositioned so no one knew it had moved. Then one afternoon, something broke. A stubborn member of the crew, a quiet man you knew never spoke about trouble, was called out. The newcomer stood beside the overseer as he was questioned. "Who gave you that stone to ease that weight?" they asked. He shook his head. "I held it and pulled. No one helped." The newcomer's eyes caught a detail. A tile slightly shifted at the base. A tiny trace that someone had adjusted the pull. The overseer turned to you. Not an outright accusation. Just a measuring look. Then he turned away and let the man go. That night, you saw the old master look at you differently. Not blunt suspicion, but asking, "Do you feel something different?" You shook your head. The boy placed a hand on your shoulder. Gently. A reassurance. "I'm here. We hold." Then the test of secrecy came. The newcomer shifted focus directly to the boy. One evening, when the last light hung faint in the dim sky, he pulled the boy aside and spoke very quietly, just loud enough for you and the old master to hear. "I know there is something between you and that other one. Why do you still get up when you're weak? Is someone helping? Can you show me how you hold on?" The boy didn't respond immediately. His gaze turned to you. You stepped closer, your shadow covering the space between them. "I have nothing to give you," the boy replied, voice firmer than usual. The newcomer smirked. "I don't want to push. I just want to understand. Maybe help you last longer." He released without touching. He withdrew. That night you sat beside the boy. "He's testing you," you said. No need for many words. "He wants to know our link." The boy said nothing. There was a new fatigue in his eyes, not from illness but from the burden, knowing he was being watched, and any reaction could pull retroactively back onto you and the broken one. You opened up. "If he finds out, we can't hide everything. The broken one is ready to take the first blow, and we'll take the next, but we have to show him. We don't break. We don't dissolve." The boy nodded. His eyes brightened slightly. The bond didn't retreat. It tightened. But the first consequence didn't come from clear discovery, but from careful inference. One morning, the woman who distributed meals, the one previously whipped then disappeared like a shadow, was brought back. No one spoke about where she'd been, only a few fleeting looks and deeper silence. She didn't speak out. But in the following days, a subtle adjustment spread. Something in the air caused people to slightly pull back from sharing small bits. The network contracted a bit, like a hand withdrawing when pricked. It was within that contraction that another, one of the long quiet ones, could no longer keep silent. He was pulled out for a so-called mismatch in the chain. Someone saw him give a bowl of water to another too long, and from that spread a habit of helping. The overseer brought him out, asked who taught him that. He remained silent. They offered a choice: name the source to keep his body, or stay silent and be moved. He chose silence. The punishment was not lashings. They removed a small part, something else. They took away part of his autonomy, made him sleep isolated, separated from some who used to interact daily, like a mental quarantine. He returned with a blurred face, and the gap between him and others widened. You saw it and felt it. The network was distorting. The newcomer didn't appear pulled back, but he became more approachable, asking small questions, not to get direct confirmation, but to watch reactions. The broken one whispered, "We'll pay a price, not by changing someone, but by redefining. We have to know who the linchpin is. If they're separated, the network still stands. We have to map." You began asking, who is the linchpin? The boy? The old master? The broken one? Me? And the frightening part, there was no clear answer. Each is a link, and each link holds part of the survival story. You wake one sleepless night. The drum is silent. Only wind whispers over the canopy. You slip out quietly. The boy sits with the small stone, the anchor you've used. He says nothing. You sit beside him. "They're pulling," you say. "Not urgent like before. They want to see our reaction. What next? Do you think we should pull back a bit?" The boy turns to you. "If we pull back, we might lose not just the network. We might lose the reason to keep pulling. But if we go on, they'll probe deeper. We hold, you hold. Others will find ways to cover." You look at the faint stars, small enough to be overlaid by sand. "Then we go on, but we make them see. There's nothing here but endurance. We turn everything into routine." The boy nods. You return to sleep with a mix of breathlessness and steadiness. Something like a small blade touches the self. You begin to understand that keeping secret isn't just hiding the cavity, not just avoiding eyes. It's constantly reshaping how people perceive your story, making kind actions look natural, making blurred support like wind over dunes, making survival not strange, but reasonable. And in the dim cold of the next morning, as you reset the rope to haul stone, you see the old master standing, watching the newcomer from afar. He tilts his head slightly, then slowly walks to you, places his hand on your shoulder, light, unobtrusive. You're doing well, but they're feeling. Be careful with the price they ask. The newcomer isn't always the pusher. Sometimes he's the mirror we use to look at ourselves. You nod. The cavity still works. An unending echo. You tell yourself, "We can't stay the same, we have to shape." And you keep hauling stone, keep watching, keep holding that fragile network, protecting and weaving, knowing the cord could tear at any moment, but also knowing if it does, at least what has lived will be remembered by the times you told the story to yourself and to others in silence. The feeling of being watched was no longer buried backstage. It began to show small cracks on the everyday surface. The overseer no longer needed to shout to make someone reveal something. He began using what he called habit as an intricate net, letting people believe what was happening was natural, then watching how they reacted to the simplest seeming things. The newcomer was inserted closer into the life of the group, not in the placed among them and just watching way anymore, but trying to become a soft link. He helped adjust the hauling ropes, pretended to work alongside the weak, opened with small questions like, "What did you do the other day to keep that one from collapsing?" Or, "Did you notice that boy acting different?" Questions not direct but enough to measure reaction. The slight frown, the hesitation, the silence. The previous test had not been fully broken, but the newcomer was probing its edge gently. The broken one called it a light assessment, a way to see reactions without plunging in hard. He told you that sometimes the eye doesn't need to look straight, it only needs to examine the shadow. And now your shadow, the boys, the old masters, and even that small cavity you used to listen to the stone transports, all were reflecting in a larger picture. Then a mistake happened. Not a big act, but a small protrusion you had learned to handle before. A man in the group, someone you had always thought of as a quiet link. The one who would pass a bowl of water to someone beside him with a light gesture when no one was looking, was pulled out. Not because he did something grand, because he didn't tilt the water container correctly when giving it to a weak person, letting a tiny drop fall and leave a damp spot on the sand floor. That dark spot didn't dry immediately, and the overseer noticed. They pulled him aside and began questioning. The way they asked who taught you to do that wasn't to name someone, but to trigger the pattern, to see who was looking at him, who reacted when he was questioned. You knew they were watching. You felt the slightly sliding distance. Somehow the newcomer's glance flicked toward the boy. The boy glanced back at you, and a small, inadvertent nod from the questioned man acted as a tacit confirmation that we're here together. The overseer didn't need to voice it. He created a loop of checking, keep asking, then start watching those who stood near. When answers came, those who reached out quietly. That quiet man stayed silent, but the gap between him and the others was pulled open. They forced him to point. He remained silent. The first consequence didn't explode as a public beating. They didn't strike him directly. They chose separation. They moved him, not out of the camp, but out of the circle of people he daily contacted. He was transferred to another area. The theoretical zone, they said, was to help him focus on work, but in reality it severed the subtle, small connections he used to keep others steady. The quiet bowl handoffs didn't happen silently anymore. He returned after several days, his eyes deeper, the distance between him and everyone else larger, like a patched crack. Something small in the network had been drawn out, and the tension spread elsewhere. You realised they weren't trying to destroy the network with one big strike. They were making it contract from within, link by link. Each small contact knot stretched out, like a rope pulled tight to see where it cinches, where old traces are being sifted. And to do that, they used the newcomer as a reflective mirror, by placing him near interactions, making others self-check their reactions. If they stood too long next to each other, if something felt off, what was between would draw notice. You began to hear the old master whisper while hauling stone. "We need a new channel. They're testing to see where the heaviest points are. Boy, you're pulling, but sometimes you pause to check. We need to make it flow like water." The boy didn't react loudly, but you saw the fatigue in his eyes, not only from health, but from holding silence under a gaze that was no longer just standing beside, but being measured. You had to choose. You could no longer hide everything under the wide layer of normal. The who is the pivot that the broken one had spoken of stopped being an abstract question. The boy, because of how he rose despite weakness, was being seen as an anomaly. The old master, because of his age but continued output, was a double-edged tool, someone who could cover and could be removed. You, because of the cavity and your subtle support, were seen as knowing ahead and orchestrating. If any one of you were separated, could the rest compensate? Not to run, but to protect. You began to change how the story was told. Your gestures, the ways you helped the boy, were made even more normal. You no longer handed him water directly, but let it reach out naturally, like someone setting down a vessel to rest. You taught the boy small reflex motions, how to place his hand on the rope, how to breathe without letting the breath fall into the overseer's view, how to regard the newcomer as a watching partner instead of a probe. You began deploying controlled decoys. Once you let the newcomer see the boy slow slightly, not because of weakness, but because he was adjusting stance, so the newcomer would think that's the normal response of someone assisting, not a special link. But none of it was entirely safe. One afternoon, while preparing for a stone transport, a young soldier assigned to carry a water container passed through the area where you and the boy were working. He stopped, staring at the boy a second too long, not because he wanted to report, because the inadvertent attention spread. The newcomer seemed to notice. He paused, then turned his head as if testing the reaction. No question, no word. But he took note. The boy seemed to sense it, and his hand tightened on the rope, not to pull, but to keep himself from reacting visibly. The next day, another light chaining check surfaced. Someone was pulled out, Not you, not the boy, but another nearby. They asked about what had changed in recent days. The gaze passed over you, paused at the silent space between you and the old master, then gradually expanded. Something small was being traced. A pattern that could link to the cavity, to indirect supports. They didn't ask directly. They began questioning who regularly passed by whom. Then another was drawn in. This time it was someone you didn't want to lose, a young rope fixer with quick hands, usually assigned to patch small frays in the rope. Someone no one expected to be exposed. He was called out and asked why he often stood beside the boy in the mornings. He answered that he was checking the rope, but the newcomer's gaze acted like a mirror. If that's true, why do you stare at them when they're weak? The small questions piled up. When he returned, there was something different in him, a small piece drawn out of his previous ease. He avoided looking directly at you. That was when the redefinition of trust began. The broken one, after what he had seen, pulled you and the boy together one night, without the old master, because he was busy keeping face, though he silently stood near to listen. They don't just want to see who is connected to whom, he whispered. They're trying to separate what underlies the connection. If they think you are the centre, they'll cut you out and the rest will die slowly. If they think the boy is unusual, they'll focus their gaze on him. You have to make them not know where the pivot is. The plan formed, simple and twisted. Rather than each person being an identifiable separate link, roles were swapped. The boy, once the noticed weakness, was now instructed to act exactly like a normal part in another group, placed beside an unrelated newcomer, creating a picture where, if anyone looked, they'd see him not directly tied to you, but as part of the background. The old master began doing the tasks you used to do, crossing attention. When the overseer asked about you, he was coincidentally nearby to create ambiguity. Who is helping whom? The broken one continued masking the cavity by generating false noises at different times, a small movement elsewhere, an anonymous mysterious aid to dilute something in the narrative. You, the one carrying the cavity, did something you had never done before. You gave others, not directly but indirectly, a piece of its mask. You gave an old friend a small, technical tip on how to listen to sound in the old vent pipes, making the overseer think there was a technical glitch instead of someone is listening. You didn't let them know you had done it. You left the incident as a small scratch in the system, creating a background to hide the real cavity being used for the upcoming stone shift. You felt the change. They couldn't grasp a clear single link. They had a sense, but no specific point to pull. And in that shimmering space you heard the old whisper in your head again. What is the cost? Who will leave the next piece behind to keep the rest? At the end of this section, you stand beside the boy and the old master under the late light. The three of you are silent, not because you don't know what to say, but because you know words can be turned back into signs. The broken one appears from behind, places a confirming light hand on your shoulder. We're pulling the rope back together, he says. But there's another step. Someone must be willing to be the sparse pivot. The one who, if cut, the rest still stands, but makes finding the centre harder. You have to choose who will be that sparse pivot. You look down at the small stone under your shirt, then at the boy's eyes, then to the old master. There is no single word answer. Many shoulds and can'ts interweave. You know that if someone intentionally becomes the sparse pivot, they will carry a new burden. And if there is no sparse pivot, the network will keep stretching. You whisper, I will weave another layer. The next one won't be any one of us obvious. I'll create a shadow so they won't know what they're pulling on. When the sun rose high, the light was no longer glaring like at the beginning. It grew thin, like a film draped over everything to hide subtle movements. The sparse pivot the broken one spoke of was no longer theoretical. It was becoming real. You and those closest to you had tried to weave new layers of cover. The boy was sent off to be trained elsewhere to break the direct association between him and you. The old master did the work you used to do as a distraction. The broken one planted false rumours about a broken one, reacting differently under pressure, making the overseers strain their eyes looking for things that didn't exist. But at the centre remained you, the cavity endlessly whispering, hiding the knowledge of timing and rhythm. And then the chosen one, not the boy, not the old master, and not you, but the woman who once carried bowls to the sick, who had recovered somewhat and survived as a quiet shadow. She was an unremarkable link, formerly a distributor, now casually offering help to other workers with their tools, standing close enough to be noticed, but not enough to be scrutinised. The night before, the broken one came to her, whispering, "They're looking for a centre to cut. If we let them latch onto one name, the rest will scatter. You could be that sparse pivot. If they look at you, they see a clear connection, while behind you the thread remains intact." She looked at him. There was no excitement. There was fatigue, but also resolve. "I will do it," she said calmly. "I don't have much left to lose. If they take something, what will they see? They'll take a part. What's left still remains." It wasn't a dramatic sacrifice. It was recognition. She would become the visible dot, so that the blur behind wouldn't be torn. She agreed to assume the temporary central role, to give them a pivot to focus scrutiny on, and at the same time learn to mask it by arranging fake relationships around her. She stood near the old master, simply to explain him adjusting the pull. She staged small conversations with the boy when he came close, so if someone noted it, they'd see a soft circle rather than a straight line. When the plan began to surface, the newcomer, the ordinary one sent down, appeared at the right moment. He approached her, asked for her opinion on distributing food, feigning confusion as someone unfamiliar with the system. He offered, "May I stand beside you while you do that? I want to understand how you keep things stable." Others looked at him and saw harmlessness. She smiled, gave him a small piece of bread so he could feel there was a link he could present to the overseers as proof that she has support, not just a centre. The broken one had cleverly laid out that matrix. If the overseers interrogated her about who helps you, the newcomer would step forward and say, "I'm just learning," pulling attention in another breath. And that relationship would look like a spreading network rather than a cuttable centre. The investigation was made public. The order for full inspection came under the guise of identifying who is over-supporting and possibly slowing progress. Each group had to write down and recount who they usually saw interacting unusually, and there was a direct cross-checking examination, standing in front of one another, looking at each other, answering questions about who appears beside whom more than usual, who seems to be covered, and who seems to have inexplicable connections. No one was immediately pulled out, but a heavier mist settled over everything. People adjusted their body language to obscure clarity in relationships. She, the sparse pivot, was brought forward during those sessions. They asked her who she usually stood next to, why she spoke with the old master so much, why the boy was sometimes near her. She answered gently, "I'm just helping teach him how to distribute. I'm just doing the old work. The old master and I adjust the rope together because it's part of keeping pace." The newcomer, not too close but not too far, silently nodded from behind as if to affirm, "Yes, I'm there to learn." Their trap was they wanted a name to pull out, a clear centre to break. She provided a controlled rise. Behind her, the old master stood among others. The boy was moved into another background layer, and you, with the cavity, didn't appear on any list. They saw her, saw the circle spreading. They remembered that circle and then began to dig deeper in that direction. And then something happened. One afternoon, when the overseers called her aside privately to ask why she had so many connections, the newcomer appeared, as if by chance standing behind, and spoke in a tone of resonance. "She's just attentive. I saw her trying to help the young workers. I think that's how she maintains progress." The voice was ordinary, but enough to soften what was being pushed toward becoming a suspicious relationship. They began to scrutinize her. They didn't ask directly about who gave water. They asked why the boy was near her last night, why the old master wasn't working alone as before, who taught him. The network now had a focus point to probe. They began tracking every time she stood next to someone. The boy was brought in to explain technique, and the old master was required to redo a maneuver in front of the overseers to confirm he was doing it himself. You felt the shift in the air. The sparse pivot was being tested. They didn't strike her directly, didn't separate her immediately. They peeled back layer by layer, placed another person near her, asked gently about the details of what she did when she helped, then found a tiny repeat, a prolonged nod, a turn that looked like trying to hide. She held still. What they found was only frequent contact, not clear evidence. The newcomer looked at you once, eyes flickering, as if to ask, "Is it okay?" You responded with a slight tilt of the head, the only permitted signal. The first price came. They didn't force her to expose the origin of the network. Instead, they clarified her role. They dragged her out into the yard in front of the whole camp. They didn't lash her skin. They pulled her up and spoke loudly for everyone to hear. "Today we review who has undue influence. You've created contacts to support others. That's something needed, but also something easily abused." Then they gave her a choice. Continue helping openly, under direct scrutiny. Every step, every interaction recorded. Or withdraw temporarily. Not beaten, but transferred to a zone where she couldn't interact directly anymore. She chose to keep helping, but under their control. Every time she stood near someone had to be public, explained, justified as having a reasonable purpose. The sparse pivot was exposed as a public node. What lay behind was further blurred. That night you met her, in the temporary shadow. She didn't resent. "They've taken the thinnest part," she said. "Now they think they've seen the centre, and what's behind it becomes harder to see." You replied, "That was the point. They'll focus on you. What's left will have breathing room." She shook her head slightly. "But who will be next if they pull again? I was the sparse pivot. Is it that now I'm the drawn pivot? And who will replace me?" You had no easy answer. Only understanding. The network had just lost one layer of cover, but in exchange had gained something else. They believed they had taken out the centre, so they were less cautious with the rest. But the investigation didn't stop. The overseers saw her circle and began to reverse question. If she was the sparse pivot, then who were the influenced? They pulled the old master out. They didn't ask directly about you. They asked about how he applied pull, why he stood near her, why he used a slight change in motion when the boy was close. The old master, older, had a habit. When questioned, he paused, then said plainly, "I'm keeping pace. I have nothing to hide. I learned how to soften the force so the weak don't collapse." She explained that to me. They recorded it. Then they turned to the boy, asking gently, "Why do you keep rising even when weak? Who taught you to take breath like that?" He only answered, "I learned from them. I don't know anyone else." The new link was drawn out further. The cord tightened. The broken one came to you and whispered, "They're peeling layer by layer. We need something to make them think they've hit bottom, then reverse direction. The harrowing decision to turn the tide. You know that if they keep following this path, they will come closer to you and the boy. They won't stop at contacts. They will begin to probe the origin of foreknowledge, the cavity. If exposed, the cavity is not just the loss of a tool, it dismantles the fragile system that allows saving people. You no longer have much space to stay quiet. A decisive choice is posed. Offer a bait large enough to deceive, a false centre that draws all attention elsewhere. Divert at a cost. You choose the newcomer. That night, you find him. He's sitting alone at the edge, staring out into the hazy desert. Not with probing eyes anymore, but with something like manufactured fatigue. like someone who's played his role long enough that he begins to feel the role as truth. You approach carefully and speak. They're placing you in the middle. They use you to measure reactions. If they continue, they'll come to me and the boy. We can give them another bait. You can make them believe the source is here. He is silent, then slowly asks, "What does that mean?" You lay the choice before him. If you agree to be the false center, so they look at you as the one who knows ahead, who helps, who coordinates, they'll temporarily ignore everything else. They'll conduct a big scrutiny on you, and they'll find something unusual and stop there. In return, we'll cover you. You won't be tortured. We'll give you a story you can tell them. You're trying to keep pace because you were taught that way. You'll be the bait and the protected one. He looks at you, weighing. A long silence. Then he nods. If you say it's necessary to keep things as they are, I'll do it. But if they find the real thing, I'll be the first one taken apart. I understand. The plan is set in motion the next inspection morning. The newcomer appears slightly more prominent. He enters the hauling area with a kind of added authority, stands near the boy, advises the old master, sits with her, as if discussing strategy. The overseers take note. They begin connecting. The newcomer appears around those keeping pace. He seems to know when to intervene. A special examination is organised. They call him out, bring him before everyone and ask, "Who do you help? Why do you usually appear before small events happen?" He doesn't resist. He looks them in the eye and tells a pre-arranged story, not a secret admission. But I'm just trying to maintain progress. I used to do this elsewhere. I know how to observe rhythm, and when I see them about to fail, I offer a small suggestion. Nothing strange. They pause. The bait works. They see the source there, a foreknower, a link that seems like a node. They focus on him, digging deeper, asking about times he appeared before incidents, requiring him to recreate moves, forcing him to explain what made him feel a need, to intervene. Meanwhile, what lay behind you, the boy, the old master, were hidden in relative quiet. Attention was drawn to the newcomer, the false source kept warm. But the cost was not light. The newcomer was pulled into a new game. Each time he appeared, they increased monitoring. They ran prediction tests to see if he truly knew ahead or was guessing. They began requiring him to point to who might collapse next, to test his understanding. Each time he succeeded, they recorded it. Each misstep they marked. The false source was worn down, and the tension bled into him. One night he came to you, his eyes rimmed with fatigue, quietly said, "They're pushing me to the edge. They want to know if I'm real or a mirror. If I crack, then it will be the real network, us, tested next." You only replied, "Keep the play. They're measuring. When they believe they've seen the centre, they'll stop. We keep the rest in the dark." On the other side, the old master and the boy began sensing something off. Glances from others thinning. The link between them and her, the sparse pivot, stretching. The young craftsman previously separated started appearing closer again, as if being pulled back into the fold. A subtle relief spread through the network. They had passed a moment where attention was borrowed, but you knew something bigger was coming. When they believed the source had been identified clearly enough, fresh curiosity would drive them deeper. And the next question would be, if he is fake, then who is real? You lie beside the boy that night, your hand lightly on his shoulder. "We've redirected," you say. They're stopping at a name, but they'll ask next if he is the node. Who gave him the insight? They'll loop. We have to prepare. He closes his eyes, sighs, then answers. "We hold. You hold. Others cover. What's between us won't be exposed." And in the darkness that night, you hear the old whisper, not from the cavity anymore, but from something you all have woven. "We had a sparse pivot. They saw. Now is the time to give them another story. A place they think is the centre, and a place that, if chased, will lead them to a false branch. We will keep weaving, We'll give them more layers. But there must be a staged collapse. A person to bear costs so the rest may live. The false source had begun to wear down like a stone smoothed by running water. The overseers saw enough signs to believe, but also saw contradictions. Those little if that were true, then why not bits. The newcomer, after those appearances that seemed to know ahead, was now placed under a more refined scrutiny. They began to test him in a second way, not only asking directly, but returning questions back at him. If you knew, then why didn't you intervene somewhere else yesterday? Who told you what to intervene on? Why, when you appeared, did the weak person not completely collapse like before? The questions were like small cracks, and he had to keep up the act, stay alert, keep the false centre warm. While inside that cage of examination, he felt the pull gradually tearing at him. You see it, the tension in the network, fragile yet forced to keep pulling. The old master whispers, they won't stop at him. When that source starts to hiccup, they'll ask themselves, if this is fake, what is real? The boy, though quiet, grows even more silent than before. His gaze touches yours, in short moments. What do we do next? The broken one no longer offers an all-encompassing solution. He puts a different question on the table. Who will fall in a controlled way? Who will make them believe they've found the final centre so the rest can breathe? You know the cost. A controlled collapse isn't dragging someone out for public interrogation and abandoning them. It must be staged, a piece so plausible the investigators can't resist, a reasonable piece of evidence for them to cling to redirect their inquiry there, and make them believe the rest isn't worth digging into. The one who must collapse needs a wound big enough to draw attention, but not destroy them. Someone who isn't the true centre, yet linked enough that they think, this is the larger connecting link. The choice falls to the young rope fixer, who had been separated before, who returned but still carried that small gap in the eyes of those around him. He worked silently, without ostentation, and precisely because of that, if something happened to him, others would easily believe there's someone behind this. The broken one came to him one night, pulled him out of the shared gaze. They're circling, he said. They'll look for a focus. You can give them something big to see, so what's left behind doesn't get touched. He looks at you. You lay a light hand on his shoulder. If you do it, me and the boy cover. I'll hold the space behind. They'll keep turning, and will believe they've torn something large. He nods, no speech. It is agreement by action. A sacrifice not flashy but cautious. The plan begins there. First, you and the old master create a series of small signals, guiding the overseers toward him. The boy pretends to be unsteady for a company's moment while hauling with him, generating those recorded, normal glances, because he's nearby, because he's checking the rope, because he's overly meticulous in adjusting. The newcomer is placed nearby as a small mirror, silently confirming that he is an influence. A few planted remarks like, he helped me balance the force, spread carefully, not from you directly, but as whispers falling into the overseer's ears. He's doing something different. The broken one manufactures a controlled failure. On another line, diverting attention, while the rope fixer is then caught, resolving it too easily, looking like the one influencing steady progress. Next, a staged incident is set. One afternoon when the stone hauling reaches a peak, a segment of rope malfunctions, apparently about to cause a large block to disrupt. Not actually falling, but enough to cause alarm. He intervenes proactively, alters the pull, adjusts something in a way clearly visible to the overseer. His movement strong, decisive, seemingly preventing a disaster. The overseer notes it. They begin asking, who taught you that? How did you know when to step in? At that moment you play a small improvised role in the background, making the boy stand nearby, looking like he's observing technique, and the old master feigns asking him about how to soften the force. The newcomer, according to the script, comes to watch, and gently tells the overseer, I saw him do it. He has a way of anticipating. Things are arranged as a chain. The intervention is displayed. Corroborating glances come from different angles, Then the story spreads. He can foresee something. The next day, he is called out. Not for torture. They hide the direct attack. They clarify his role in a subtle way. They announce in front of the camp, "We have found an influence point. This person has a special way of keeping progress. We will put him forward as an example. Nothing is wrong, but we will require him to publicly pass on the technique in front of many. So every action of his is now monitored to see if he can repeat it. If he truly knows, there will be a difference when he cannot. If not, he's just an ordinary helper." They bind him into a chain of in-depth examinations. Each time he reenacts the action, they record, compare. They pull in those around him asking, "Who do you usually stand near before he intervenes? Who gave him that look? Does anyone else do the same with him?" The false network they built around him begins to appear real. The old master's public support, the newcomer's ambiguous observation, the boy placed to witness without being too obvious. Then they offer him a choice. Continue as the centre of attention, as a special influence. With constraints. Everyone around him must now report what they see. He must explain every intervention, or withdraw, becoming a lightly isolated person so they believe tested and nothing unusual. He agrees to be the false centre. They declare publicly, "We found a focal point. This person can predict upcoming events by observing small shifts. We'll use that knowledge to steer progress." They don't realise the focal point is the bait they have bitten into. The rest of the network, including you, the boy, and the old master, suddenly recede into a thinner darkness. The payoff: the overseers turn away feeling they have a keystone. They reduce direct hunting into the subtle actions behind and instead focus on tracking the new influence point. Your cavity senses the redirection like a light current. Not complete silence, but glances no longer fall on you and the boy as directly. The network, thin, cracked, holds again by sacrificing another link. But the cost isn't only that the rope fixer has become the node. He is stretched. Each time he must repeat the anticipation in front of the overseer. He must pretend to know, reproduce what he's been taught, all while appearing natural. The constant scrutiny turns him into a worn mirror. If one day he fails to predict correctly, they mark it. If he predicts too accurately, they suspect. The bait erodes and he, who agreed to save the rest, begins to realise he's also caught in another network. Not of survival, but of being measured. One night he slips his hand under the straw mat, pulls out the small piece you gave him as a silent signal, looks toward the little stone under your shirt in the dim, then whispers, "I don't know how long I can hold." You only place your hand on his shoulder. Your eyes say, "I will hold. I'll redirect again, if needed." The plan is not perfect. The overseers will begin to suspect again. They will ask themselves, if he is the centre, then who gave him that sense? And the cycle will start. That is what you predicted. But now they are running inside the loop you drew. Instead of continuing to chain straight toward you, or the boy, they are stuck on the obvious exhausted node. And the looks that once would have fallen on you are reflected back like shadows through many layers. That night you move between the three, the boy, the old master and the fixer. "We bought some time you say. But what next? They'll come again. The newcomer will see the gap if they dig too deep. The boy will be pulled into the question, why do you still rise when you're not the influence point? We'll have to weave further." The boy nods slightly. The old master gives you a tired look with something like agreement. "We won't let them see more. We'll make finding the next centre, like a shadow moving on water, hard to grasp, easy to reflect." The fixer, the temporary pivot, closes his eyes. "I'll keep the role, but when they return, we need a new place for them to look. Don't let the loop die." That night you lie with the small stone under your shirt. And for the first time in many days, the whisper is not only alertness, it is a reminder of the structure woven. "I created a false hole. They bit. They're pulling. Now is the time to prepare what comes next, the next fake shadow. and the arranged reveal. Another collapse, another person who can sacrifice so the majority survives. The investigation didn't stop at the false source, as you predicted. They began to see something off in the pattern, a blank space between what was recorded and what was sensed. The newcomer was increasingly pushed into a clearer role. He was questioned more closely, made to repeat his predictions, forced to explain in detail every intervention. Each time he saw ahead, they marked it. Each time he was off, it left a small scar on the performance. And from behind the overseer, like a snake testing the weave, started circling back. If that node was only a fake, then something else must be feeding it. The cavity, the network you had woven, might soon be probed, not with a direct strike, but by containment, by testing each strand to see how it reacts when pulled. You know clearly, if they turn that cycle on, they'll get to the boy and the old master next. They'll try placing them side by side. Repeat questions about why you still stand up, why you and that other person always appear together. And if they sense a core link, it will be squeezed. The counterattack has to come before they can close that loop. The plan was drawn up on a dim moon night, silent like the huts you lay in. The broken one spoke first. They're circling. When they think they've reached the centre, they'll widen behind it. We need to make them believe they've done it, then lead them into another trap. Another controlled collapse, but different. Don't expose anyone as the node this time. We create a vague picture, a crack so they think something has dissolved and stop, while simultaneously pushing their gaze into a chain of false reactions. The old master proposed, show them the decay of a link that isn't us. The young fixer, the temporary pivot, has been stretched. Make it seem like he breaks himself. He will be the crack they look at, and they'll believe the rest is shrinking out of fear. The boy will stay still as before, unresponsive. And you create a fake diffusion, a series of small signals from many directions so they don't know where to pull. They'll lose rhythm, they'll open a gap. You added, and the newcomer, he's tired. If we give him the impression that the real source is behind, he'll turn his investigation back there, pulling them farther in. I'll give him a false clue, a small seemingly casual exchange with the old master, a piece of advice about how to watch that he carries in front of the overseers. He'll become someone who wants to prove that something bigger fed him the insight, instead of just a single node. They'll circle, that's the bait. The real thing stays buried. The boy nodded silently. I'll stay quiet. When they ask, I'll still say I learned from them. I won't give them a new trace. The plan was executed like a rhythmic dance. The young fixer was placed slightly off, positioned to make a small adjustment to the hauling rope, while a fake incident was created elsewhere by the broken one. A hiss from a pipeline delaying the stone transport, forcing some overseers to disperse to inspect. Meanwhile, you deliberately had the boy appear at the right moment to watch the fixer, but not stand so close as to arouse suspicion. The old master performed a few force adjustments in front of another group, then explained to an assistant. A staged scene so that those watching would see reasonable busyness instead of linkage. The newcomer, per script, appeared again, half probing, half seeing a signal. He approached the old master, listened to a false explanation about how to keep rhythm, then walked away with a confident nod. That nod was recorded by the overseer. He's not just intervening, something behind taught him. After that, the young fixer deteriorated. It wasn't a sudden break, but a series of small amplified details. One morning they called him out, placed him in the middle of the camp and publicly said, tone soft as if explaining, "We've discovered that there is a weakness in how some people are supporting. This person has perhaps done too much, to the point he can't hold himself together. We will temporarily separate him so he doesn't disrupt progress. Later, if he truly has special knowledge, we'll give him a chance to prove it. If not, he'll return to normal." It was a form of controlled collapse, not because they believed he was the centre, but because they wanted everyone to see. Tension had appeared and worn itself out. They thought something in the network was dissolving. As expected, they eased off, trying to pull more directly on the boy, and the old master, the circuit scattered. Their gazes no longer concentrated on the pair. They began looking for other cracks. You felt a breathing space. Hours, a few days where the questions weren't all layered at once. The newcomer, led by the hint of something bigger behind, began redirecting his inquiry deeper. He dragged overseers into a series of fake analyses, sowing suspicion about diffusion instead of cutting directly into each link. But nothing was entirely stable. The false source still leaked, and through that, a recognition. If the young fixer was the crack giving them rest, then what lay behind still existed. They wouldn't give up. They only changed how they probed. Your counterattack plan wasn't an end. It was a strategic delay. A blow that forced them to circle, tire, and believe they'd touched the centre. That night, as you sat beside the boy and the old master, in the thin shadow before sleep, you heard the boy say, "They're slowing. We have a space." But you see, they're no longer looking straight at me like before. I can breathe a little. The old master replied, "That space is a double-edged knife. It gives us room to repair, but if we linger too long, they'll look harder. The network isn't hardened, it's stretching." You lightly touched both their shoulders and said, "We bought a breath. But what next?" They'll ask, "If he's not the centre, then who is next?" We need another layer, a way to make them believe something has already dissolved and isn't worth pulling further. You lay down, the small stone pulsing beneath your shirt. And in your head the whisper was no longer mere vigilance. It was a conduit. We've led them in circles. Now it's time to repair the next turn. Make them think everything is torn, then hide what's been newly mended. We don't escape. We keep weaving. The breathing space you bought didn't last forever. It was like a thin film floating on moving water. Enough for you to place your hand on it and feel the ripple. But if you stayed too long, that skin would crack and dissolve. Since the false source and the controlled collapse happened, the atmosphere in the camp shifted. Fewer overt, noisy interrogations, but an increase in sidelong glances, subterranean questions, and a sense that the network was being probed not by touch, but by weight. The young rope fixer, the temporary pivot, now moved among people with a slightly lower posture. They didn't fully separate him like before, but he was watched differently. Every time he touched the rope, every previous prediction was remembered like old ink, and he had to perform the influence point role again in a controlled way to keep them believing the lead was real. That burden carved into him, not only physically, but mentally. Every night he lay still, face taut, heart beating as if counting each pulse. If the next day he failed to predict correctly, if the act was exposed, then they would turn the cycle back toward you, the boy, and the old master. And just as expected, a new blank formed. Questions returned in a different manner. If that fixer has ability, who gave him that ability? Who was he near before he intervened? Those questions aimed at the remaining pieces. They didn't rush. They pulled out small segments, asked about the boy's breath, and the old master's gesture, when standing near the fixer, looking for repetition, seeking overlapping points. They began laying successive tests, once calling the boy out, asking, "Why do you still stand when you are not the centre?" Another time bringing in the old master to redo the motion, demanding he explain every detail as if assembling a machine, and watching the reactions of those around. You know that passive silence is no longer enough. The network stands at an intersection. If they isolate a clear pair, for example the boy and the old master, they'll pull them apart. If they come back to you, the cavity will be exposed. If they unearth the source of the false source, the whole next loop will snap back. So the next counterattack isn't merely concealment, it's transformation. You no longer just weave another layer of disguise over the link. You begin to give a new story, told not in words but in movement. You and the boy rebuild another frame. Instead of letting the connection between you appear as direct help, it's now diffused through a chain of intermediaries. The boy stands near someone else, a less noticed person, a small assistant in the distribution group whom you've seen cautious, now placed in the role of recipient of instruction. The old master returns to doing the things you once did, deliberately not standing close to the boy while demonstrating technique. Instead, he presents it to that assistant. The assistant then speaks to someone else, and others see the boy learning from them, not directly from you or the old master. The cavity is hidden by creating surplus chains. A person watches another, that person tells a third, then a fourth mimics. There is no single point link to pull. The broken one comes to you one night, his eyes the colour of ash, yet holding a quiet sharpness. They're grinding. They don't smash, they take something carefully. Last time we tricked them with a big piece. Now we need to make them believe the piece has dissolved. They'll search for what comes after, and after that. We need something to make them stop. Not another collapse, but a catching ground. You ask, what's a catching ground? He answers, a layer that makes them think they hit it, then pull back. They'll think, there's been a breakdown, no need to dig deeper. The fixer can continue being the influence point. The boy and the old master need to appear as the affected, not the source. We put them into roles that are questioned first, but give answers as if pulled by others, not directly. And you do something small, a gesture that if they look, they'll think it's habit, not a sign. The cavity becomes the new background breath. This time you go further. You introduce an intentional mismatch. While the overseers probe the old ties of the old master and the boy, checking those connections, you expose a deliberate misalignment elsewhere. One of the less involved people is suddenly seen standing beside the young fixer when he predicts. Instead of letting that become a thread pointing back to you, you restructure the situation so the overseer sees a small diffused disorder. It seems he passes it to this one, to that one, not holding a fixed connection. Questions begin to shift. The assistant is asked, who did you learn from? And he simply replies, I saw many people doing it, I picked from each. The presumed source gets diluted into a layer drawn from everywhere. The unexpected emerges. The new overseer, who had been particularly cautious, begins to show signs of fatigue, not from physical exhaustion, but from the weariness of handling a network without a clear centre. Each question, each comparison, each pattern, pulled apart, is then negated by another overlapping layer. They slow. Inspections lengthen, and sometimes they slip inadvertently, giving you and the group a small window to repair and reinforce. But that breathing room has its cost. Suspicion spreads not by focused direction, but as noise. One night a lower-ranking overseer, careful, not the head, slips near you while you prepare the rope. He doesn't shout or ask loudly. He just murmurs, you know, something's changed. They see the blurred connections. They're being deceived. But who's next? Who's the shadow behind the shadows? His tone isn't accusatory. It's a quiet warning, a question placed into the silence. You don't answer directly, just nod slightly, then continue work. In that sidelong glance you understand. What they sense is no longer a clear who, but a feeling. They know something's shifting, but can't name it. That's where you can place a new layer, not to hide the lead, but to create a false map that, if probed, will send them the wrong way. And while the fragile network stretches to avoid being squeezed, another piece of news slips in from inside. A water carrier whispers to you. They brought someone else from outside. He wasn't in our camp before. They say he's a new trainer to help increase performance. He's not like the previous newcomer. There's something unworn about him, but he says little. He doesn't stare. He listens. This is the new threat. An untracked element introduced as a secondary oversight. Not directly probing, but listening enough to connect patterns that were previously separated. The broken one reminds you, that's another trap. Not because he'll expose us, but because he can link the scattered pieces, like a mechanic reassembling a machine. He could be the third glance we haven't measured. You begin to bait him, not by resistance, but by giving him a controlled shift. You let him see a few layers of fake support from the boy and the old master, as if they're only teaching and learning. You let him perceive something like a flow instead of a fixed link. When he retreats, it seems he recognises complexity, but there's nothing overt to fix on. This chapter opens more than survival. It begins to raise a deeper question within you, a question of limits. The network can keep bending, hiding, swapping, redirecting, sacrificing, fabricating. But each twist wears a part of itself. Trust cracks, fatigue accumulates, and the weight of keeping secrets grows heavier. You look at the boy one morning as the first light filters through the slats of the hut, seeing a new crease of worry forming on his brow. You look at the old master, noticing aging not only from years, but from the way he's become quieter. You know, what comes next isn't just dealing with what they observe. It's deciding what to keep holding, what to let go, and whether there's a real path out of this loop at all. Catching ground at first felt like a thin blanket wrapped around you, enough to keep the bite of cold from going too deep, but not enough to seal every crack. In the days after, the overseers no longer lunged in with direct questions. They pulled back, rested, looking like people thinking. That calmness made you tauter than the old shouting. They gave you the sense, if you move too fast now, they'll know. But at the same time, they gave you breath, the rare moment to stitch, to mend a torn piece, to weave another layer. Then the trap began to take shape. The old overseer, who no longer interrogated directly but preferred to observe silently, now appeared with a subtle difference. Not the constant probing gaze, but an invitation cloaked in reverse trust. One afternoon, while you were near the boy and the old master adjusting pull, a new manager, unremarkable but with something that made you feel off in the way you hear something, called the old master aside. He spoke quietly, not quite questioning, more like offering, "You do well. They see you trying to keep progress, and that matters. I want to hear you explain how you soften the force. Help me understand so I can give others less burdened guidance. We don't need anyone pushed. You can come talk to me tonight, somewhere quiet." This wasn't interrogation. It was a different kind of snare, one that's hard to refuse because it carries implied value. He didn't say, "I suspect." He said, "I trust." It was a reversal, offering an open door, and when the invited steps through, eyes on either side will look closer, not to catch immediately, but to measure that something he does, to find its origin. You watch the old master. He looks at you. No words. A slight nod. "Go, but be careful. The web can turn back." You know they're trying to strip the covering. They want him to believe he is being valued, that if he opens up, what he holds can be recognised as talent, not a connection. When he goes into the small room behind the stone store, dim light, you and the boy pretend to be busy outside. You listen, not for specific sounds, but for the feeling. He turns his back, speaks softly, then silence. A quiet breath slips through the crack. He's asked about technique, then encouraged to describe how he softens force, how he watches for the moment of collapse. And deeper, the other person isn't just memorising words, but noticing the way he gives glances, the pauses, the shifts like knots that evoke a link between him and the boy, between him and you. If they stopped there, perhaps the old master would be pulled into tighter scrutiny, maybe another layer would be teased out. But that night he returns. No panic, just a new fatigue, and a tacit understanding. They set a trap without saying so. They want me to expose myself. A similar trap is laid for the boy not long after. Another man, less powerful but following higher orders, calls him out saying, "I've heard you keep rising even when weak. I want to know how you do it. If I understand, I can pass that on so others don't fall. Can you show me a little?" The question sounds like concern. The boy looks at you. You nod. Answer, but put that place into another story. Don't let it become a direct link. He murmurs, replying with learned phrases. "I learn from them." I just breathe like that. The other nods, showing little. But his eyes don't leave. Something in the way the boy speaks is recorded. Not the straight line of being taught, but the sense of appearing regularly. You begin to suspect the catching ground has softened their direct aggression to make room for a mutated strategy. Instead of ripping a link open, they sow seeds of doubt, layer by layer, by offering invitations that look like collaboration. These invitations often come with a line, "We understand each other. Prove we can trust each other more." One, once invited, reveals himself in a small sharing way, and that small share is noted, analysed, connected with other fragments until a new link emerges. That is when the outsider, the trainer, who doesn't fuss with words, begins to play a different role. He hasn't directly questioned you, the boy, or the old master. Instead, he sits in a corner, quiet-eyed, listening as if scraps of language, gesture, motion fall to the floor, and he's shaping them into something new. At first you think he's just another ambiguous pressure, another layer to diffuse attention. Then you realise he's connecting dots. One morning, passing the water distribution, he quietly calls you aside, away from the crowd, and says, "I've seen a few asynchronies in how they stand near each other. It's not a clear someone helping someone pattern, but a repeated rhythm among three, separating and coming together. They don't want light on it, yet they're trying to make something look accidental." You answer calmly, giving nothing away. Just survival. People hide. Finding patterns is your job. He nods, but in his eyes is something you can't measure. Not straightforward suspicion, but retention. He doesn't walk away immediately. He quietly watches the boy from afar, watches the old master explain technique, then looks at you standing silent. Just enough of a centre to see, not to expose. You set a bait. One afternoon you let a small trivial sign appear, pretending to forget a minor adjustment with the boy while hauling. The trainer quietly takes note. Then you reverse it, manufacture an artificial little support signal between you and someone else to see how he responds. He doesn't speak, but you catch his gaze flick to the boy, then linger a bit longer on the old master. He begins weaving the asynchronies into something like a map, and that unsettles you. An unclear figure is crafting a wafka, picture detailed enough that, when needed, pulling one thread would reveal the whole frame. Meanwhile, the network must decide, strike first, or lure them deeper to create a larger breach that can break their investigation. One night the boy whispers to you, "If we do nothing, they will cut us small. If we act, they'll know we can respond. Should we use him, the trainer, to draw them elsewhere? He might think we gave him a clue and pull something else out himself." You look into his eyes, seeing the heavy fatigue. We can't let him freely link everything. But if we expose a bit to trade for a new cover, maybe we buy time. The old master will be the one to explain. The old master, when no one's watching, pulls you into a dark corner. "There's another choice," he whispers. "They're laying a trust trap. We can give them a seeming real bait. A small exposure that makes them believe they've hit the centre, and the rest recedes. The young fixer sacrificed once. He could be positioned as, 'Who spread it?' I can let them see me shielding that, giving them reason to focus elsewhere. But what's the cost? Who gets pulled in next?" You feel it clearly. Every counterstroke stretches another part of the network. The who is centre can't be obvious. If you expose something as bait, you put yourself and others in lines of suspicion. If you don't, they keep drilling, filling tiny blanks into straight connections. One night when oversight calls a small informal meeting, just exchanging to improve progress, he offers a proposal. Someone in the group will be chosen to be trained directly by the newcomer. That is another disguised trap. The boy is told, if you learn directly from him, you'll be seen as capable. They'll ask you less about why you rise. They'll think it's technique, not a link. It's an invitation to put him into a new loop, to make the trainer the third eye that can both confirm and connect their narrative. You know if you leave it, the trainer will have more direct contact, and what he sees will tie to what you hide. But if you refuse, the boy will be suspected again for not cooperating. You give him a slight shift in wording. Learn, but don't let them think it's independent. Make it seem like you learn from many, so what he observes doesn't look like a unique link with you. He nods. That night you leave the hut feeling caught between two lines of fire. One is their slow probing, the other is your calculated exposure. The whisper never ceases. They set the trap with trust. I can counter with another trap, make them believe they hold the centre, then redirect. Or I can draw something from them, take what they believe is real and replace it. You don't have an easy answer, but one thing is clear. What's next will not be a quiet extension. It will be a hand of cards where every small move is measured, and someone will become the price. The inverted trust trap they set doesn't roar or clang. It's like a door opened with a smile, obvious, seeming like an opportunity. But behind that opening is a finely hidden net, each strand marked by a gaze. They call it public collaboration, a series of open performance trainings where a few people in the camp are brought before the crowd to share technique with the rest, as if they are passing survival on to everyone. It's the game the overseers want people to reveal themselves through. If you jump in, you expose your style, your origin, your links. But if you don't, your caution is noted as non-cooperation. The boy is invited first. They frame it as an excuse. Set an example so newcomers see that the way you keep rising despite weakness isn't magic, but a teachable technique. The invitation comes with light praise. You're doing well. Show everyone how you hold your breath. We want to replicate that. The boy looks at you. You give a small nod. Agree. But on the terms discussed. Learn from many, like gathering breath from around. Don't let them think there's a single source. The old master isn't called out immediately, but he's pulled into a different orbit. The technical explainer, elevated to show the smallest adjustments, to see how many layers of directness can be displayed without revealing the real linkage. The broken one whispers to you, this is when they want to see what's real to fix in their notebook. They'll use you to pin something down. We have to give them something they believe is true and let the rest remain untouched. The plan is refined. In that training session, the boy will present his technique as something learned from a set of vague sources. A chain of small people arranged to introduce him. A new assistant, another young worker recently reintegrated after being separated, and a low-profile member of the group taking turns standing beside him to observe, then recount their part, making the overseers see a spreading network rather than a straight connection. The old master will stand nearby demonstrating softening force in the context of a general technical training, emphasizing that it's part of the whole system, not one individual. And you, silent at the fringe, adjust your own small movements so that the external trainer and the supervisors perceive the background breath as common terminology, a reflex shaped by environment, not a special arrangement. But the most subtle part lies with the new trainer from outside. He's invited to sit front and centre. Their aim is to get him to confirm that there is a clear source to lean on, a point they can believe they can control. The broken one sees an opportunity. Instead of letting him uncover the real network's details, they guide him into a small, distorted picture. He's intentionally shown a few, asynchronies woven, a staged exchange between the boy and another assistant, a glance that lingers just a bit too long between the old master and the young fixer who had been separated before, a gesture slightly altered to hint that someone behind is passing it on. The trainer will note these, connect those signals into a structure that looks like a focal point, and will report back about that patch, drawing the overseer's attention away, giving you and the real network another breathing space. You and the boy open the performance. He is brought up, placed centrally, with a few students who've never stood together before arranged around him, all prepped a few hours earlier to pretend to observe and narrate back according to a vague script. The boy talks about breath, about feeling weight in the bones, about how he learns from many people. Each word deliberately broad, unfixed. Sometimes I see them do it, then I feel it, then I try. When an assistant places a hand on the rope and says, "I saw you do that too, so I started trying," the trainer nods, taking notes. Something appears like a naturally spreading network. No one can point to a single pivot without pulling everything out at once. The old master comes after, performs a few softening motions before the crowd, then moves into explanation. This isn't magic, it's understanding timing. It's a chain. The thing you see, the reaction of that person, then what follows. One person alone couldn't do it. It's the whole group. The trainer looks at him, then turns to you, as if seeking the reflection of something deeper. You just stand quietly at the edge, holding the posture of unconscious presence. A background presence, not too prominent, but enough that when he turns back to ask questions, he senses a sequence rather than a source. The performance succeeds. As arranged, the overseers record it, the trainer walks away with a seemingly coherent structure, and they perceive a background breath drawn in whispers. These people don't have a single source. There's a transmission layer. They share technique. But the danger is behind that. The trainer, after leaving, doesn't turn away immediately. He quietly approaches you at the end, probing. I see a lot of clear asynchronies in the air. They cover it by spreading everything out, but there's something like a repeated emphasis among a few. Not everyone is the centre. It's what lies between them. You choose not to give him a clear view. That's how they survive, you reply. If they pick apart each piece, they die a bit every time. He nods but keeps something in his eyes, a quiet attention that deepens. That unsettles you. You know he will push deeper, not by direct questioning, but by creating patterns and feeding them back to the overseer. There's something diffuse, but seeming to hide a centre. If we push on another face, we can pin it down. Just then, the mid-level manager, always standing behind, projecting approval, but never taking his eyes off, announces they want to publicise a small result. The training will become a template for each group to pick someone to continue passing it on. That means the boy is not merely performing, he's drawn into a role of direct transmission to another group, layering over him again. Now others can say, "I know how you breathe because I learned directly." It's a double trap. During performance he's dispersed. In continuation, he's asked to validate what people have heard, clarifying that there's nothing special, but at the same time supplying pieces for others to register. You and the old master adjust. Let him speak in Q&A style. Let people ask him about origins, and he says, "I learn from many, from them, from many movements. It's a chain. I don't have a centre." They agree. What needs masking is covered. What can be diffused is pushed outward. Each part of the training becomes a new layer, forcing the overseers to expend effort, comparing what's essence, what's reflection. As the performance recedes, the effect begins to show. The overseers temporarily pull back from you. The boy, the old master, not returning to a state of disbelief, but moving into a phase of seeing who opens up proactively. A day later, the trainer reports what he saw. Something is shifting, but not clearly. There's a fake centre, a spreading layer, and something in between. The silent observer nods, and he decides to test that in-between by bringing a new person, originally unrelated, closer to the old master, under the pretense of learning. The next trap unfolds. They don't interrogate directly. They start seeding doubt among the network members by posing implicit questions. Did you notice anything odd about him doing that? A few minor people in the camp grow quieter. The delicate chords are stretched again. The broken one, seeing that, whispers, "I gave them a bait. Now it's time to make them believe they've swept clean, then clear out the rest. I have to prepare something that makes them think the big link is broken so they won't go back to find what's really holding me." You understand that the battlefield is no longer overt. They aren't using lashes as much, but bestowed trust as a soft noose. Every collaboration invitation carries a needle, a small nod, a light share, a slightly different look. And the outside trainer, he isn't pulled into an obvious alliance. He's piecing together a picture that, if pulled at the right time, could push back, or be turned by you into another shadow layer. That evening, after those being probed retreat, you meet the boy and the old master. They're pushing the in-between, the boy whispers. The newcomer will go look for the next core. Do you think we should let him fall into something next to buy breath? The old master is silent for a moment, then says, we give them another small collapse, not to break someone, but to show them a vague, false link has been broken. Then let them withdraw. Give them the feeling, we touched it, we swept. Then in that time we shore up elsewhere. You listen, then offer a new whisper. What about the trainer? He might believe something has been hit, then turn deeper into something else. I give him a small clue about an old link, a faint shadow up front. Then let him connect it himself. When he thinks he's understood, we redirect. The boy holds still. The old master acts like nothing's happening. And I create the next bait. They nod. The cycle continues, but now with an added layer, between trust and suspicion. A counterstrike, using their own trap to plant false belief in the trainer, making him think he's uncovering the next centre, while in reality he's going deeper into a counterfeit map you wove. The breathing space you bought didn't last indefinitely. It was like a thin film floating on moving water, enough for you to lay a hand on it and feel the ripple. But if you stayed too long, it would crack and dissolve. Since the false link and the controlled collapse happened, the atmosphere in the camp shifted. Fewer loud, direct interrogations, but more sidelong glances, subtle questions, and a sense that the network was being probed not by touch, but by weight. The young rope fixer, the temporary pivot, now moved among people with a slightly lower posture. They didn't fully isolate him like before, but he was watched differently. Every time he touched the rope, every previous prediction was remembered like old ink. And he had to perform the influence point role again, in a controlled way to keep them believing the lead was real. That burden carved into him not only physically, but mentally. Each night he lay still, face tight, heart beating, as if counting each pulse. If the next day he failed to predict correctly, if the act was exposed, then they would turn the cycle back toward you, the boy, and the old master. And as expected, a new blank formed. Questions resumed in a different manner. If that fixer has ability, then who gave him that ability? Who was he near before he intervened? Those questions aimed at what remained. They didn't rush. They pulled out small segments, asked about the boy's breath, and the old master's manner when standing near the fixer, looking for repetition, seeking overlap. They began staging successive tests, once calling the boy out, asking, "Why do you still stand up when you aren't the centre?" Another time bringing in the old master to redo the motion, demanding he explain every detail as if reconstructing a machine, and watching the reactions of those around. You know that active silence is no longer enough. The network stands at an intersection. If they isolate a clear pair, for example the boy and the old master, they'll split them. If they come back to you, the cavity will be exposed. If they uncover the source of the false source, the whole next loop will snap back. So the next counterattack isn't simply concealment, but transformation. You no longer just weave another camouflage layer over the link. You begin to offer a new story, told not in words but in movement. You and the boy rebuild a different frame. Instead of letting the connection between you appear as direct help, it's now dispersed through a chain of intermediaries. The boy stands near someone else, a less noticed person, a small assistant in the distribution group, whom you've seen cautious, now placed in the role of recipient of instruction. The old master returns to doing what you used to do, deliberately not standing close to the boy while demonstrating technique. Instead, he presents it to that assistant, who then tells someone else, and others see the boy learning from them, not directly from you or the old master. The cavity is hidden by creating surplus chains. One person watches another, that person tells a third, then a fourth imitates. There is no single point to pull. The The broken one comes to you one night, his eyes ashen, but still holding a quiet sharpness. They're grinding. They don't smash, they take things carefully. Last time we fooled them with a big piece. Now we have to make them believe the piece is dissolved. They'll search for what comes next and the next. We need something to make them stop. Not another collapse, but a catching ground. You ask, what's a catching ground? He replies, a layer that makes them think they've hit something, then step back. They'll think there's been a breakdown, no need to dig deeper. The fixer can continue as the influence point. The boy and the old master need to appear as the affected, not the source. We put them in roles that are questioned first, but the answers come as if pulled by others, not directly. And you do something small, a gesture that if they look, they'll think it's habit, not a sign. The cavity becomes the new background breath. This time you go further. You introduce an intentional mismatch. While the overseers probe the old ties of the old master and the boy, checking those links, you expose a deliberate inconsistency elsewhere. One of the less involved people is suddenly seen standing beside the young fixer when he predicts. Instead of letting that become a thread pointing back to you, you restructure the situation so the overseer sees a small diffused disorder. It seems he passes it to this one, to that one, not holding a fixed connection. The questions shift. The assistant is asked, "Who did you learn from?" And he simply answers, "I saw many people do it. I took from each." The presumed source is diluted into a layer drawn from everywhere. The unexpected arises. The new overseer, who had been particularly cautious, begins to show signs of fatigue, not from physical exhaustion, but from the weariness of trying to parse a network without a clear centre. Each question, each comparison, each pattern pulled apart is then contradicted by another overlapping layer. They slow. Inspections lengthen, and sometimes they slacken unintentionally, giving you and the group a small window to repair and reinforce. But that breathing room has a cost. Suspicion spreads not in focused lines, but as noise. One night a lower-ranking overseer, careful not the chief, slips up to you while you prepare the rope. He doesn't shout or ask loudly. He just murmurs, "You know, something's changed." They see the blurred connections. They're being deceived. But who's next? Who's the shadow behind the shadows? His tone isn't accusatory. It's a quiet warning, a question placed into the silence. You don't answer directly, just nod slightly and continue. In that sidelong glance, you realise what they sense isn't a clear who, but a feeling. They know something's shifting, but can't name it. That's where you can lay a new layer. Not to hide the lead, but to create a false map that, if followed, will send them the wrong way. And while the fragile network stretches to avoid being crushed, another piece of news comes from inside. A water carrier whispers to you. They brought someone else from outside. He wasn't here before. They say he's a new trainer to help boost performance. He's not like the previous newcomer. There's something unfrayed about him, but he speaks little. He doesn't stare. He listens. This is the new threat. An untracked element introduced as a secondary oversight. Not directly probing, but listening enough to connect the scattered pieces. The broken one warns, that's another trap. Not because he'll expose us, but because he can link loose parts together. Like a mechanic reassembling a machine. He could be the third gaze we haven't measured. You begin to bait him, not with resistance, but by offering a controlled shift. You let him see a few layers of fake support from the boy and the old master, as if they are simply teaching and learning. You let him sense something like a flow instead of a fixed link. When he pulls back, it seems he recognises complexity, but there's nothing overt to fix on. This chapter opens more than survival. It raises a deeper question within you, one of limits. The network can keep bending, hiding, swapping, redirecting, sacrificing, fabricating. But each twist wears part of itself thin. Trust cracks, fatigue builds, and the burden of keeping secrets grows heavier. You look at the boy one morning as first light filters through the hut's slats, seeing a new crease of worry on his brow. You look at the old master, and notice him aging not just from time, but from the way he has grown quieter. You know, what comes next is not just about handling what they see, it's deciding what to keep holding, what to let go, and whether there is any true way out of this loop at all. The trainer, after the vague false convergence performance and the controlled break, was drawn deeper into a thought. There was something in between that couldn't be grasped by looking directly. He was not a fool. What he gathered wasn't just loose fragments, but a sense of the unspoken rhythm among 3-4 people, something that slipped away when he tried to touch it. And instead of leaving, he stayed. He became more active in stitching the asynchronies together into what looked like a soft focal point, and brought it to the overseer one morning. They haven't completely dissolved, he said. There's a place between the movements, not any one person, but something holding them together that they don't admit. If we dig into that between, we can peel back the real origin. The overseers, long content with the feeling of having hit, were pulled back gently. They didn't ignore him. Once again, their quiet gaze returned to the in-between, not like before, drilling into a pair or a clear point, but tracking recurring moments. When the boy rises despite weakness, when the old master reaches out to explain, when you drift at the edge, and something like a ground flickers. An unnameable patch that keeps drawing them in. Now, it wasn't they've caught something so much as they were being challenged by a structure that couldn't be crushed with one closed fist. You feel the shift. The catching ground has been torn thin. The temporary gap is being probed again. And the between, the trainer pointed out, is no longer a marginal, vague story. It's a new spiral that, if left unaddressed, will pull their gaze back to the boy, now placed in the transitional motion position, and into the cavity inside you. The boy comes to you one afternoon while the warm wind blows through the camp. His eyes are sharper, not from strength but from the tension of knowing something is being pulled close. You said if they go deeper into the between, we could lose the new path, he whispers. I stay quiet, but if they don't let go, they'll find where we shield you. What are you going to do? You don't answer immediately. You circle where he sits, place your hand on the small stone beneath your shirt, tracking each beat. There are 2 choices, you say slowly. One is to stay silent, we keep his new shell, let them see the between as a vague point they can't clearly grasp, and let them dig bit by bit without breaking through. That means they'll poke and then withdraw. We gain more time to pull him farther. 2 is to do something public, something bigger that draws their eyes somewhere clearly else, like a newly staged rupture, so they think, this is the centre, we've found it. Then they'll pour everything into that, and the real part behind stretches out. But the public move will expose something. It could be the old master, it could be me, it could be someone else drawn into questions. Which do you choose? The boy is silent a long moment, then softly says, we can't just wait for them to dig. If they go into the between without being stopped, they'll trace the new thing, the cavity. But if I make a loud noise, they might forget the between for a moment. You make the noise, I'll cover the path. You nod. The loud noise has to be crafted. It must be clear enough to pull focus, not a clumsy outburst that could be mistaken for error, but a consequence that makes logical sense. A shift in the hall so the overseer thinks, this is the spot where things are tangled. I have to handle it, the rest can wait. The old master is pulled in. He is the right person to perform that public act. He's old, experienced, and everyone is used to him being the adjuster. If he displays a major intervention, like reworking an entire sequence of force by introducing a new tweak presented as rescuing progress, then eyes will fix on him as an influencer, and the trainer and overseers will try to peel apart the between by asking, what did you do differently? Who taught you that? And while they question him, they can't immediately dig back into the between, because the noise has made them believe they're handling the centre. The plan is set. The next morning, as the overseer passes through the hauling area, the old master pretends to detect an unusual change in how force is transmitting, something about to make a small group fall behind. He calls out, draws attention, and then publicly intervenes with memory and technique. He alters the sequence, shifts what seemed like it would cause a collapse, and makes it smooth again. The whole crew watches, the trainer records, and the overseer stops, focuses. "What did you do?" they ask. "Adjusted the rhythm," the old master replies, calm but weighted. "There was a blockage in the spread. If I hadn't, some would have gone down. I'm fixing it." The action is like a stone thrown into a still lake. Ripples radiate, and the epicenter is the old master. All eyes concentrate on him. The trainer following the bait you laid begins to think. If the between is vague, then this is what they're dealing with. Maybe what I saw earlier was amplified to hide something else. They redirect. Clarify what you did. What changed? Who taught you that? Meanwhile, you and the boy shift the other background. An old assistant, previously inconsequential, carrying water, a small link presumed unrelated, is pulled into a new role. He's given a bit of base technique from you. How to manufacture a fake pause in water distribution, a small glitch that looks like desert conditions, so a few others stall, hesitate, then step back when they see the old master adjust. The script soothes. I'm handling the route. The others are just consequences. The overseer, now split, half watching the old master, half probing the between the trainer mentioned, must decide. They choose to indulge the obvious public act first. Scrutinise the details of the technique the old master used. Ask those nearby if they noticed any prelude. Force the old master to explain each component. While they unpack that action, the between is temporarily pushed back into ambiguity. What truly connects the rest gets a moment to breathe. But the shift does not come without cost. As the overseer pours effort into the old master, the trainer does not take his eyes off the between. He still retains that sense, still pieces the small patterns. Sometimes the old master glances at you while explaining. Sometimes the boy stands a little back, not exactly hiding, but like a shadow source, supporting the explanation. He begins to suspect. The public act might be the trap that makes me miss something else. If I lean too much into it, I'll forget the between that's changing shape. You stand at the edge, watching the old master twisted by questioning, watching the boy hold still in a temporarily stable corner, and listen to the old whisper. We've lured them elsewhere. But they still have a path back. I need the next move ready. And the next move comes from an unexpected direction. The peripheral assistant, who you previously gave a little background technique, appears with a look like he's just been stirred from unconsciousness. He comes to you, keeps distance enough to avoid notice, then exhales quietly. There's a new one. He used to be a shadow. Now they've brought him in. They call him the feedback collector from other groups. He asked, who's being influenced in the recent changes? Not directly asking the boy, he asked those around, have you noticed anything odd in how they stand beside each other when you explain? The newcomer, officially called the feedback collector, is something you don't fully understand. He doesn't ask straight, doesn't piece a big patch at once, but sows seeped questions into smaller people. He spreads the lack of clarity into quiet suspicion among those who once trusted each other with glances. He offers another choice masked as harmless. A small line to the boy. If you have someone you learn from, I can record their progress. With the old master, it's different. I see you doing something with a sequence. Could you show me what you're adjusting? That is the new blade. A blade that doesn't strike openly, but cuts into how words are linked into quiet prompts. There's something between you, I can't name it, but if you tell me a bit, I can help, or I can show them you're protecting each other. You look at the assistant, then at the boy and the old master. He brings another choice, you say. He could be an ally, a place for us to weave another layer, or the thing that makes them think the connection is official support, rather than a survival network. Or he'll be a new bait that causes the between to be swept again. The old master smiles faintly, tired but sharp. I can't let him weave freely. I can give him a story, give him a fake piece to carry to them. They'll latch onto that. Boy, do you want something to say? You learn from many, including the feedback collector. That's a new layer. The boy lifts his head, eyes filled with the focus you saw in the early days. If I give him a piece, he'll go tell. I can let him carry a kind of false confirmation. Then we pivot. I won't give him a path to ask about the between again. You see the map expanding. The between hasn't been exposed. The public noise has worn the overseer out elsewhere. And a new figure brings two roads. Expand the network by making him an ally with work to do, creating a layer of fake, official confirmation that everyone learns from each other. Or trade a small freedom for him, turning him into an intermediate messenger you can use to transmit safe signals. That night, as the camp sinks into the dim oil lamp light, you sit between the boy and the old master and say, "We'll play both." I give him a small piece of confirmation, a story that the boy learns as part of an open training program, and the old master adjusts progress because he keeps balance. When they carry that, they'll hear, "There's a spread, but it's organised." And I keep the between covered. I wait for the trainer to go too deep into the public act, then pivot if they come back. "Boy, if needed, I'll take you away." Not as a runaway, but as someone doing a new adjustment. They nod, and in that nod is complicated consent, not trust without doubt, but acceptance of tension as part of survival. The trainer brought his report like someone carrying a smoothed stone, not a direct accusation, but a question that sounded helpful. "They aren't dissolved," he said to the overseer, in a low voice. "But the thing between them, the thing you can't quite grasp, is shifting. If we can figure out how to seize that in between, we can understand why some things happen, and we can control the next step." The overseer looked at him without speaking, then ordered a series of light checks. Nothing overt, just enough to pull attention back toward the spots that had been hidden. That was the first sign of suspicion turning into action. They didn't press straight at you, the boy, or the old master, but began examining the newly woven core stories. The new figures placed into the structure. The open training. The false confirmations from the feedback collector. They brought the feedback collector closer, not to interrogate directly, but to hear him recount what he had seen, then to cross-check what seemed understood. What he brought back was a fragmented picture. There was clear diffusion, public action, a vague middle intersection, and a layer of confirmation being deployed. But what held it all together had not been peeled apart. You felt the subtle shift. Focus was no longer simply angled away from the boy. Waves of doubt returned, brushing what had been buried under layers of confirmation and collaboration. The boy appeared outwardly calm, but his eyes paused in moments when someone new approached, when a question dropped as if casually. "Do you really learn from many, or is there someone in particular who helps you?" Those words weren't spoken loudly, but they left trembling trails in the air, trails that someone like you could feel, like sensing a very fine string being tugged. The old master bore the weight of the public act he had performed. They pressed him for more detail on every adjustment. They hesitated before accepting his explanation that it was part of the chain. They probed the middle he had mentioned by placing next to him those who had stood with him longest. An implicit suggestion. Was he generating the diffusion, or merely passing it along? When they asked, their eyes flicked towards you too, a glance like searching for a faint reflection at the edge, not precise, but enough to make you clutch the small anchor inside. The feedback collector, having received the confirmation pieces you planted, began doing the unpredictable work. He moved from person to person, passing along what he heard in ways that made listeners wonder, "Did I hear that right?" He didn't directly link you to the boy, didn't overtly try to stitch things together. But the answers he wove, "I've seen him learning from many sides," or "There's a faint contact in the middle when they stand near each other, then pull away," compiled into a picture that forced investigators to reassess. Was the middle still something vague, or was it being redefined as an organised linkage? The situation sharpened one morning when a small group was called out for a progress review under the guise of assistance. The boy was invited, not to perform now, but to comment on someone else. They seated him with another person and asked, "Who taught you that? Where do you think the connection between you and them comes from?" He answered as rehearsed, "I learned from many. I don't know what's head or tail." They wrote it down. Meanwhile, the trainer's gaze kept returning to the middle he still felt. Not a distinct centre, but a fluctuating junction, expanding and contracting, that, if pressed just so, could expose what was being concealed behind it. That was when you decided to roll out the next phase. The public adjustment had dispersed attention somewhat. The feedback collector's false confirmation provided a temporary cover, but the suspicion around the middle kept being probed. You and the old master worked in a shadowed corner through the night to engineer what would be the next louder sound. Not a high-risk exposure, but a controlled misprediction. The idea: use the trainer himself as bait to make the overseers believe they'd caught a new shift in the middle, then force them to stare at something else, a seeming source of the middle, and let that be publicly broken in a small way. Behind it, the real middle would remain untouched, retreating deeper, restructured under new reflecting layers. The boy would be kept in the role of a pupil, alongside the trainer, and you would introduce a plausible slip somewhere else, enough to tilt the overseer's focus. The old master was the one to create that misdirection. One morning, when the hauling crew was encountering a slight hitch with the old pulley, a delay you had arranged to occur, he pretended to have lost control of force, making a few seem on the edge of collapsing. The overseer came, scowled, and the old master used the terminology you taught had been heard before. That middle is shifting. I feel a fluctuation in how force spreads. I'm adjusting. Maybe the diffusion is trying to reposition itself. The trainer listened and didn't walk away. He recalled the sense of that middle, then concluded, "There's a new convergence point. If we find it, we can peel away what's holding them together." That was the bait. They went deeper. The overseer latched onto the new image, convinced there was a network adjusting itself, and put the trainer in the verification role. What changed? Who was nearby when it happened? While they probed the apparently touched middle, the boy, per the arrangement, was brought out to confirm that the diffusion came from learning from many points, that the source wasn't a single one, but a hazy convergence. The feedback collector closed the narrative. "I've seen it. They spread. There's change, but it isn't from a single link." You and the boy kept your composure. You held the posture of ambiguous trust, neither resisting nor over-cooperating. What had to be ready was what came next. Once their gaze was fully fixed on the new convergence point and the false middle they believed they'd touched, the real truth lay elsewhere. The quiet ground from which all the sequences of technique, breath, and interaction began. Then, just as they believed they had a grip on the middle, a small event unfolded. The feedback collector lost a piece. He came to you, eyes showing something no longer naive suspicion, but calculation, a slight hesitation. "Something isn't flowing," he whispered. "I brought the story of confirmation forward, but some are beginning to ask, if that's diffusion, why are other things still standing?" They're linking the learning from many with something else they haven't yet identified. If they dig into that, they'll see the gap behind. Do you think they should be steered toward believing in something next? You gave him a controlled narrative. Let them see a small part of what's been broken, a false linkage publicly repaired. They'll believe something was dealt with. Meanwhile, what truly holds us, we slow it down, like a move concealed beneath another layer. He nodded, and so a new layer was laid. The feedback collector appeared before the supervisory group and said, "I've noticed a new anomaly. The place once thought to be cracked has been mended. We should stop over-focusing there." They pulled back, sensing another touch. And in that loop, the real path of the boy, your existence, and the true middle remained quiet. But something shifted deeper. The trainer's fatigue was no longer vague. He began to pause longer when looking at what he once trusted. One night he slipped close to the boy and whispered, "If I give them what they think is the centre, they might withdraw, but if I keep pushing into the middle, I fear I'll be the one pulling the thread into something else. Do you feel something slipping beyond reach?" The boy didn't answer immediately. He just looked toward the shadow where you stood, then nodded slightly. "I'll give you something to carry. Keep the reel still." You stood between two forces, the overseers, weary from balancing between the middle and the things rising to the surface, and the true foundation demanding the next move. You knew the next play was a wager. If they kept believing in the vague false link that had been broken and mended, they'd miss the signal of what was about to move. A reconfiguration that could push the boy farther out, position the old master as a new adjuster, and open a path out of the loop. But if, or they returned and drilled deeper into the real middle, something would touch the cavity, and all covers would crack. That night you went back to the sleeping place. The boy lay there, eyes open a long while before he noticed you. "We made a sound," he whispered. "They believe they've held it. Do you still trust the retreat plan?" You answered, "Two parts remain. One is to move you, like a technical mission, not escape, but a reasoned relocation. 2, if they ask something odd, we use the trainer and the feedback collector as decoys. Make them believe what's being taken apart was handled. We're not done. They'll come again, but next time they'll have to choose, dig deeper into the middle and face me, or lock themselves inside what they believe is the exploited centre." The boy placed his hand on yours, firmer. "I go on, but this time if they probe too deep, I want a short escape. Give me a sign, a touch, a look, so if something happens, I know I'm not alone." You nodded. From behind in the dim shadow of the hut, a new whisper seeped in. "We've built the cover, we've thrown them off rhythm. Now give them the choice that feels safe, a small controlled collapse again, or a new opening. I'm preparing an exit, but also a path forward." When the first light of morning barely breaks, the silence isn't a comforting quiet, but a held breath. People work, but every movement carries weight. The between is reclaiming the attention you bought with earlier layers of cover, not with loud interrogations, but with invisible glances, questions hovering in the air like smoke from a fire that hasn't died. The trainer hasn't given up. He carries his sense around like a needle, tracing the surface of thin cloth, probing where an old seam might hide. The feedback collector is no longer just a conduit. He's learned to sow small doubts so they spread like grass roots underground. Not overtly, but enough that one person glances aside. 2 people grow cautious, and a chain reaction emerges that you feel with sense more than hear in words. The moment you've been waiting for has come. The choice you, the boy, and the old master talked about. Make a public move to mislead, or stay silent and wait for the between to be pulled apart. The between is no longer a single link. It's the fragile overlay of the way the boy rises, the way the old master adjusts force, the way you appear in the background of everything. If they pull the right thread, the whole structure will twitch. You look at the boy. He's aged a little in the past few days, not from lost strength, but from the way he hides the need for safety behind a strained smile. He catches your eye when no one's watching. A slight nod. The time. The plan was clarified during the night. The big noise you need to create is a rupture that looks natural, a technical fault, big enough to draw them in, making them temporarily forget what's shifting underneath. The old master will become the centre of attention, but not with the same forceful intervention as before. This time, he will show them a spontaneous change in the between, an unexpected fluctuation in how force propagates, seeming uncontrollable by known technique. He will pretend to notice it, then save it, making a large adjustment, declaring it a structural shift in progress, and convincing the overseer they're addressing the core of the between. While they dig into questions about what changed, you and the boy will use that gap to execute a movement, taking the boy out of the focus area under the guise of a specialized shift change, while resetting misleading signals around the old master, so if they circle back, the alteration appears as a sequential reaction, not a source. The morning begins like any other, except the air is heavier. The old master goes through his motions, circling, sensing, adjusting, then pauses, frowns, and lets slip naturally enough for the echo to spread. Something's wrong. The force isn't transmitting evenly. It's like it's changing itself. The overseer's initial response is in the eyes. Stops, comes closer, asks a few small questions. That between is put on the table, the immersive. Trainer watches quietly, then steps back as if trying to connect the newly surfaced overlap with what he'd felt earlier. The sound is made. The old master intervenes. It isn't a quiet rescue of progress. He uses his whole body, his age and latent authority, to realign the chain of force, so overt that everyone not only hears it, but sees it. The overseer draws it out, takes notes, asks, "How do you define that change? Who taught you to see it? Can that repeat?" He explains in the language they're coming to know. It's part of the between. It generates itself and then corrects. We adjust to keep progress because without that between, some would fall. The trainer, per the script, doesn't let it pass. He turns to you, seeking a reflection, a bit of unconscious support, and notes. There's something like a background holding shape for that change. Eyes fix on the old master. The between pauses. The overseer delves into unpacking the adjustment. Who was there? What triggered it? Digging into old connections. Meanwhile, what's behind begins to move. The boy is sent on a small task. Inspecting the stone slabs beneath the hall path, a routine explained as ensuring the line doesn't collapse. This time, the assistant with him, whom you'd prepared in advance as the reappearing witness to his learning, is with him. They send him not as escape, but as a reasoned relocation, part of what's staged as evaluating endurance under new conditions. You stand at the edge, keeping your arm close, tuning small motions to create a matching background breath for the unfolding change. A slight tremor when the old master shifts. A brief nod as the boy passes, cushioning the story. The feedback collector, seeing the new surface ripple, quietly brings it to the overseer. They're handling a hitch. It seems part of the between has repositioned itself and paused. Maybe that's a sign something's been restructured. They step back, believing they are managing the between, so much so they forget the deeper movement beneath. But the miracle isn't entirely yours. The gap lies in the trust they placed in having touched it. The overseer doesn't fully withdraw from the between. They dig deeper while glancing elsewhere. The trainer begins to feel it. Something is being led. He believes he's at the top watching the old master, but the underlying background remains elusive. Quietly, he seeks to understand more about the boy, and his gaze, though drawn along a different path, never fully leaves that between he once felt. By midday, an unintended vibration appears. The assistant accompanying the boy, the witness figure, gets called back for something unrelated. The overseer simply asks, "Who do you usually go with when checking like that?" The question seems small, but the sidelong look is like a pebble hitting a spinning gear. Something flickering between what's natural and coincidence. The boy is not pulled back. He remains where few watch, but suspicion, tiny, grain-like, falls into the mechanism. The overseer glances over you, just a scanning look. Not stopping, just checking whether the background is stable or if anything else quivers. You remain silent, giving nothing away. Afternoon passes. The between is gradually pulled back under the weight of scrutiny. The trainer, oscillating between confidence in the public break and the vague sense that something else remains, becomes more nimble in his observation. He doesn't question you directly. His eyes drift to mismatches. When the old master explains in detail, his gaze touches the boy. A disjointed inspection, enough for you to feel the tension. Night falls. You and the boy meet in the shadow of the sleeping area. They're still watching, he says. The between hasn't been abandoned. The trainer doesn't fully believe. He still holds something in his hand. Do you think there needs to be a next step? You look at the small stone under your shirt. The anchor you touch to remind yourself. Yes, they'll come back. They'll put the between on the table again. We need something to make them think they've seen the core once more. A smaller false collapse so they chase something else again. Meanwhile, what's real moves? I'll take you farther. Next time it won't look like you're moving alone, but like a natural part of the structure shifting, an unexpected alteration in the pull so they don't think it's escape. We'll give them something to believe is another adjustment, then pull back. He bows his head, inhales deeply, and exhales. I keep going, but this time I need a small signal, something to tell me if they dig too deep I can snap back. Give me a sign. You nod, then take from inside your clothing a scrap of cloth, an old thread sewn in, a silent token. If he has to leave suddenly, he'll pin it to the outside of his sleeve so that next time you meet, a slight nod will be your quiet confirmation. I'm still here. Far off in the dim campfire glow, the old master sits alone, holding a small stone as usual, and whispers into the air. They've taken the bait. They think they've found the centre. I'm preparing the next crack. You know what comes next isn't a simple reaction. The trainer might bring a new doubt, or return to the between and touch what you've woven. You have a choice. Trigger another false collapse to pull them further away, buying a short time at the increased risk of exposing what's hidden, or stay silent, patient, and let the boy move naturally tomorrow, hoping the focus floods into an already saturated structure. You close your eyes a moment before answering. Tomorrow we do both. Let the old master create a small fissure, like a technical instability that brings the between up again. Let the trainer believe he's caught it. And you move while. They're analysing as part of a small update, not thinking you're shifting. If they ask, we answer, it's the next adjustment. I learn from many. What's behind stays quiet. The boy closes his eyes, then opens them with a line. I'm getting tired, but I don't stop. You hold the background, I hold the between. Old master, you hold them. You nod, and in that moment you hear the old whisper, not just vigilance anymore, but a recurring plan. I set the bait. I pull them. I keep the other peaks blurred. Next, I have to prepare the place they think is the core, then make them believe only a comfortable survival remains. A controlled retreat. And the real path, I widen. The double sound plan was flipped on like a finely laid trap. When the old master brought the between up again, pretending to detect a strange shift in how force was spreading so that all eyes focused on him, what was behind began to move. The boy was taken for a supplementary evaluation under the guise of a routine technical assignment. He didn't disappear, only shifted just enough to fall into a zone of relative safety, while everyone else was still deep in peeling apart the public adjustment. The feedback collector, in his habit, brought back new fragments of confirmation. The between had been re-triggered, repositioned, showed signs, then sealed. And the overseers, for the moment, were satisfied. And you, always on the edge, tuned each cushioning touch. That background they couldn't look at directly had the hard task. Make every small change look like a natural continuation, forcing anyone who went deeper to overlook what was truly being restructured. The threads, though fragile, held. A harmless assistant was inserted to play the new supporting role. A few unremarkable stories were spread to build a cover layer over the old link. Night came, and tension gathered. The trainer, after hearing the reports about the between being set up, began to turn a portion of suspicion inward. He felt as if he had been led. The public act made him believe he had grasped the centre, but the deeper feeling wouldn't let go. He quietly approached the boy, asked softly like someone testing a vibration. If I give them what they think is the core, can what's behind still breathe? The boy only answered with a look, then retreated into the new safe shell. I set the bait. I hold still. The next morning what had been prepared triggered again. Another vague false break. The old master once more noticed an instability in a hall sequence, making a small section seem about to collapse, then used the old technique to save it, turning the crack into a necessary adjustment. The overseers, still engaged with the between, were pulled into details. They pressed the old master on how he saw it, how he intervened, who stood beside him when it happened. While they were pulling that centre apart, the boy was quietly shifted. He went into another area, under the name of assessing performance under new conditions, where a few people in the network had already prepared a small cover, hidden water, an old conduit that could be used to catch breath or pass whispers, a place where a few could exchange words without drawing supervisory attention. As afternoon fell, the boy's temporary safety became a controlled withdrawal path, not a noisy escape. A small justified shift carrying a story. He went to inspect to ensure the transmission at the distant station wasn't compromised. When the overseer asked, the answer was confirmed by the mate. Witnessing assistant, I went along to record. He followed instructions. Nothing unusual. The moved piece drifted like a gentle breeze, out of the focal point the between might have led them toward. The old master, exposed under their questioning, became the public balancer. His answers were valued, and curiosity about the between diffused into spontaneous adjustments that no one dared fully pull apart, because doing so would force them to face something unclear and possibly pivot elsewhere. The big noise, as you intended, made the overseers believe they had touched and adjusted, so they slowed their deep chase. You and the old master knew it wasn't a total victory. They would come back and the between still twitched at the edges, but the new gap was enough to keep the boy and something else alive. That night the three of you met in the dark corner of the hut. The silent message passed by touch. The old master said, "They believe they've touched it. They're replaying the loop. The between could come back stronger. The boy has gone a little further. You won't let them pull further, right?" You answered, weary and resolute. "I won't give them the between. If they want to turn it over, I'll give them another story to cling to. And if necessary, I'll trade something else, a smaller bait, for greater silence. One last time." The boy closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered, "I'm still alive. I'll be what tells it. You keep the silence. The old master holds them. I'll go on." The final cycle didn't explode like a storm, but like a series of quickened breaths that then slackened. The overseers, having been led into a layer of fake centre and a few breaks that had been handled, began to scatter their attention. The trainer, after touching that middle again, delivered a hesitant report. "There's something, but it's not clear. Maybe the diffusion has been restructured. Maybe I was wrong." They didn't have the courage to rip apart what had been publicly adjusted for fear of losing progress, and that was the survival path you, the boy, and the old master had woven. In the temporary quiet, they bound what remained without destroying it. A few people with small adjustments were left in positions that could be observed. The old master was allowed to continue guiding, as a silent, internal watch, whom everyone believed was maintaining order. You, the one holding the cavity, quietly listening and reweaving, remained the background no one named. The boy was moved to a less scrutinised corner, carrying the faint sign of an unspoken survival, keeping breath by appearing to be on a new assignment. The network contracted, reshaped, no longer whole as before, but not erased. Those who had once been central links now bore invisible scars. The old master carried a deeper gaze of endurance. The boy had a new layer of learning, not only technique, but how to keep silence within silence. You carried what had happened under the skin, a story untold, and a small stone beneath your shirt that still warmed whenever you remembered the choices. Day after day, rumours of links once peeled, broken, then mended, spread like powder that had already blown, making the overseers believe they had come close to the core and momentarily retract their fierce pursuit. They changed their questioning, no longer chasing every touch, but checking is progress stable, so as not to disturb the surface. That became the fragile gift of survival. Attention divided, and in that gap, the real connections held. Not too visible, not too safe, but alive. You know the story will not end completely. These memories, those small touches, the patched hollows will live in your silence and theirs. One day the boy looks at you as the sun fades behind the ever-rising pyramid, and he says, "If one day you're not here, someone will hear." You answer, "The story isn't to hide, it's to hold. I tell whoever believes, I give you the sign, they will hear." The old master, sitting mending a piece of rope, is silent a moment, then says, "We don't talk about grand freedom. We talk about every morning we still pull, every adjustment that isn't broken, every person who survives. That is the freedom of small time." And you whisper to yourself, living in the body of a pyramid labourer, bound to stone and driven into work. What they can't take is the silent voice you keep. What they don't see is the mute bond between us. You can be pushed, transferred, measured, but not erased. If they ask who did what, you just stay silent long enough so the next one knows how to keep pulling. The ending isn't a closed door. It's a door left slightly ajar, a pause, a calculated delay. The boy still stands, the old master still adjusts, you still listen. They aren't fully free. They remain tools, fragments in the system. But within that deformed network between what's been peeled and welded, there exists something no one can quite measure. A story that the listener, you, experiences, holds, and passes on. If someone lays a hand on your shoulder and asks, "How did you live?" you won't need to tell all the details. You just lightly touch the small stone beneath your shirt and say, "I kept pulling."